Shall we come
Is
to
this
order?
unrelated?
Shall we come to order? Welcome to the Midcoast Community Council meeting of October 22nd, 2014. Will the council members please introduce themselves?
Chris Johnson.
Dan Haggerty.
Dave Olson.
Laura Stein.
Lisa Ketchum. And we have Nicholas Calderon, Supervisor Horsley's aide. Would you like to give your report?
I would. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for having me tonight. So, a couple things. Supervisor Horsley was hoping to be here tonight, but he is fulfilling his grandfatherly duties and is with his granddaughter tonight, and so he was not able to make it. However, I do have a couple announcements. First, the 7th Street fence, which has been an ongoing issue out here, is at the point where the county will be applying for a coastal development permit to remove the fence. That will be going to the Planning Commission on December 17th. So we're making ground due to, we wanted to bring it earlier, due to some big projects, specifically Big Wave and a project in the Highlands area, which each one of those projects are getting their own Planning Commission meeting. We had to bump it back. So, but that will be going on December 17th, and so we're making ground on that. Secondly, in November, we are still looking to lock down a specific day, but we will be doing another park meeting. So in the past, we have had San Mateo County Park Director, GGNRA, and State Parks come out to the Midcoast Community Council and present updates on park projects. So we'll be doing one of those in November. It's looking like it will be 19th, 20th maybe, somewhere around that time. But we haven't locked anything down. But go ahead and look for announcements on that in the future. San Mateo County Park Department and that staff is doing phenomenal things. And Marlene Finley, the new director, has been amazing. And parks have really become a priority. And so we're really excited about the progress that has been made, and looking forward to getting that update this next month. Lastly, I'm sorry, we were asked about the Green Valley Trail and for an update on that. So the update on the Green Valley Trail is that the Park Department will be bringing a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on December 9th to hire a consultant to do the plans, the permitting, the design, all of that for the Green Valley Trail. So that will be at the December 9th Board of Supervisors meeting. And at that point in time, we will know who the recommendation is. I don't have that information at this time, but that is moving along, and we're very excited about that. As we all know, the Green Valley Trail is going to be a huge addition to the San Mateo County Park system, especially linking to Devil's Slide. So we're excited about that.
Quick question on that.
Of course.
Is the easement negotiated now, or is that going in parallel?
I believe that's going in parallel, but I will go ahead and check in on that and let you know. I also know there was a request for a map of the route of the Green Valley Trail, and when I spoke with Marlene, she had said that, you know, right now we're still using the old map, the map that's been circulated, excuse me, for quite some time, and so we don't have an updated map. But as soon as we do, we will go ahead and release that to everyone. Lastly, the county, I'll go ahead and just read this. The County of San Mateo is pleased to host a public reception for the Coastal Commission during their November meeting, which is going to be held in Princeton. The reception is going to be on Wednesday, November 12th at the Half Moon Bay Yacht Club, which is at 214 Princeton Avenue in Princeton. It will start at 6 p.m. or whenever the day's agenda concludes. So if it runs late, then it'll be a little bit later than 6 p.m. It will be light hors d'oeuvres and a no-host bar. So that will once again be on November 12th. And other than that, I have no other announcements. Does anyone have any questions? Questions or comments? Len.
On the congestion management study, when will the new report be posted on the website?
Len, that's a great question, and I will allow our consultants to answer that at the time that is. Congestion management you're referring to. I'm sorry. That is, we're looking at, we'll be able to probably post that late November, maybe early December, with the community engagement meeting in January. So we have some rough ideas as to what they're going to be like. We have to sit and talk with Caltrans, make sure everything's in good standing with them, and then we'll be bringing those forward. All right. Is that it? Am I done?
Is that it?
That's it. That's it on my end.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is public comment. Does anyone wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? I guess not. Council members? Oh, Dan. Public comment, Leonard Warren.
Two things. The Granada Community Services District quarterly recycle event is this Saturday, which is what, the 26th. So it's always the fourth Saturday of each quarter for items that you'd otherwise have to drive up and drop off at the Recology Recycle Yard in Pacifica. And I understand the flyer is up on the website, granada.ca.gov. The other, it's on the district-owned property on the Burnham Strip at the foot of Portola, Avenue Portola. The other item is I went to the web to try and find out how big the main fire station in Half Moon Bay is at the south end of Main Street, the one that I frequently refer to as the Taco Bell on steroids. And I was unable to find out how big it is through that route, but what I did discover is that they put out a request for bid with the due date of August 8th, so this is 2 months ago that it was due, which means God only knows when they issued this RFP. They put out a request for bid to design a 10,000 square foot fire station. Now, to put this in scale, their current lot is 10,000 square feet, so imagine the building being built edge to edge on all four sides. This is a ridiculous size for a fire station for El Granada. And for comparative purposes, I brought up two Google Maps side by side at the same scale. One of them, the Taco Bell on steroids at the end of Main Street, and the other one, the current site of the El Granada fire station. And from that, I determined that the building they have down there is about 11 or 12,000 square feet. So to know how ridiculous this is, just drive down to Half Moon Bay and stand on the sidewalk in front of that building and imagine that monstrosity in the downtown core of El Granada. This is a total outrage. The fire district is out of control. And this is my argument in a nutshell. I haven't publicly made this argument. Many people have heard this privately. And I haven't made it publicly because we were trying to get the Granada Sanitary District reorganized to a community services district, and I didn't want anything to derail that. But I've been on board for 17 years now, and for probably 15 of those years, I have felt that special districts, single-purpose government agencies, are a spectacularly bad form of government. And the fire district trying to railroad in this fire station, they're refusing to have any community meetings to discuss it with the citizens of El Granada, is proof that single-purpose government agencies are a spectacularly bad form of government. The only reasonable municipal government is a city, and failing that, a single CSD that does all of the government functions in a given area. So we now have the CSD. The fire district needs to just plain go away. If they're going to have this bad attitude that they're going to railroad it in for the greater good without even bothering to consider what the people in El Granada think about it, they need to just go away. And we can split up the fire district, and Half Moon Bay can take over their part, and the GCSD can take over the other part. Or we need to recall the rest of the directors that we forgot to recall in the last time around. But I really think that the Midcoast Council needs to step in and get involved in this before it's too late.
Thank you, Leonard. Dan, did you have something?
Yes, also on the post office lot, I want to report that we have over 300 signatures on the petition that pretty much requests the fire district to look elsewhere to build a fire station. And for the GCSD to acquire the land, and for the harbor district to only sell to the GCSD. The interesting thing is that there's been very little effort in getting these signatures, very little time spent, and there's about, I'd say 90–95% of the time when an individual understands the whole situation, that they clearly get passionate behind the idea of having something in between an empty lot and a maxed out building. So it's clear, I haven't met anybody that says, yes, a full build out of that lot is a fantastic idea. That's all.
Thanks, okay. I'll close the public comment. Next item is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
5-0, approved. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our regular agenda. First item is Surface Beach Shoreline Protection Device. Presentation and discussion of a conceptual design for shoreline structure at Surface Beach to protect Highway 1, improve beach access, and the coastal trail at that location. The desired outcome is to gather community feedback on the conceptual design and community priorities for the project.
So I'm gonna, James, why don't you come up, and then Grant, why don't you and Alvin come up?
There's plenty of room.
Yeah, so just so everyone knows, so James, some of you may have seen James already. Some of you may have not. James is the county's project manager on this. He's also the county's project manager on Connect the Coast side. He's working on the parallel trail project that we're working on. So you're going to see a lot more of James, and he does phenomenal work, and we're very lucky to have him. Grant and Alvin are with Reckley, the consultant firm, and they also do phenomenal work. So we're very excited to have them here tonight, and we're excited about the work that they're going to be doing. So I just want to give them a quick introduction.
All right, before you start, let me just point out, the microphones are for the TV sound.
Sure,
So you need to be conscious of them. We all can hear you, but it's for the TV.
sure, okay, thank you. Thank you, Nicholas, for the introduction. I'm James Hinkamp, planner with San Mateo County Planning and Building. I'm also the project manager for a couple projects here on the Midcoast, and the one that we're about to speak about is the shoreline protective device at Surface Beach, not too far from here, actually. So the intent, as Lisa mentioned in the description of the agenda item, is really to present some conceptual alternatives that have been developed with a consultant, Reco. And then we'll also introduce, before that, we'll introduce the overview of how the project came to be, and then we'll produce the design alternatives and receive comment from the public and anyone who wishes to provide feedback. So I apologize for the technical difficulty. It's not a proper PowerPoint, but we do have slides per se on a PDF format, so I'll just scroll down to the next information page. So this is a project that involves the County of San Mateo, Caltrans, and the City of Half Moon Bay. Technically, the project area is within the jurisdiction of the city, but the county has agreed to manage the project and facilitate the permitting and design, and also Caltrans will take over the construction of this project. And Reco is our consultant out of the East Bay. I have many offices all over California with specialty in this type of geotechnical and civil engineering work. The intent of the project is really to stabilize this area as it pertains to Highway 1. And there will be a shoreline protective device either in the form of riprap, which are essentially 2 to 4 ton rocks piled on the embankment, or a type of sheet pile wall with some riprap as well and a toe. And there will also be a staircase to preserve coastal access. Currently, as many of you may know, it's more or less of a scramble down the embankment to reach the beach. And we'd also hope to preserve the beach and also to preserve the coastal trail. The trail at this point is severely denigrating. It's hardly usable in certain spots for pedestrians and bicycles alike, and there's actually a dangerous component to it. So there's a funding arrangement whereby the county was able to leverage funds from the Costco Busan oil spill in the Bay Area several years ago, and that comes out of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We also have some money from the county general fund, as well as a local grant match, and the city of Half Moon Bay is contributing as well. Caltrans has a considerable portion of the funding dedicated for the construction itself, and it will be the construction of the wall and the engineering components, and then the county will be overseeing the construction of the trail itself atop this construction. So I mentioned the primary objectives are really for protecting the infrastructure that is really a key link for this region. You know, if we were to imagine that the erosion were to continue, Highway 1 could be severely impacted to the point of failure, and it would be quite a considerable hit for the local economy, as well as, you know, visitors and residents alike, as well as the enjoyment of the coastal resource. And in fact, you know, state law through the Coastal Act mandates that coastal access is preserved, and water, recreational water activities and working waterfronts are maximized along the coast. So essentially, we'd like to be able to preserve this area and prevent the potential crisis that would occur if the erosion were to continue. And so we've come up with a design that would essentially halt that and create an interim solution before a long-term solution is found. Getting a little bit ahead here on the slide. So I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit. So this slide shows that we will be looking at the prioritizing an interim project before a long-term solution is found. The long-term solution is currently under study, but for now we are looking to implement something that can be constructed within the next year or two, because the erosion is actually slated to potentially progress to impact the highway within 5 to 6 years. And one of the key components of the design that we will show you is the ability to remove the interim design in a way that would be cost-effective and manageable before the long-term solution that is found can be implemented. So that is also a consideration when you look at these designs. We'll want something that is somewhat nimble, so to speak, but also with the integrity to be able to protect this state highway. And then we'll also be looking to maximize beach space as it currently stands, and then also minimize environmental impact. So with that, I'll turn it over to our consultants. We have Alvin and Grant from RECO, and they will explain some of the engineering and environmental details.
Thank you, James. Thank you to the council, and thank you to the community members for coming out. We're actually pretty excited to showcase these alternatives that we have in hopes of protecting the beach and providing continued access and recreation. As you know, with all projects, there is it can be quite complicated, some things that it entail would include permitting and studies before construction begins. So some of these environmental studies for NEPA and CEQA, for those that don't know, NEPA is the National Environmental Protection Act, and CEQA is the California Environmental, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. These studies include the biological assessment, the location hydraulic study, water quality report, hazardous waste assessment, geotechnical and paleo study, cultural resources, sand supply study, wave run-up analysis, and sea level rise. With those studies, of course, permitting is also going to have to be considered. The agencies right now that may be at play include the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers 404 permit, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the 401 certification. The California Coastal Commission will be overseeing the plans, and as will the California Department of Transportation. We have looked at several alternatives, and we believe that we're going to show you the two that we believe will have the best chance of not only protecting the beach, but again, allowing the access that are, as James mentioned, are quote unquote nimble enough so that it will work as an interim solution. So this is the first conceptual alternative. Maybe a little hard to see.
Yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning, because we all had trouble figuring it out too.
Okay.
If you remember the picture on the previous slides, this is essentially the same view.
Right.
Can we flip back and forth?
Oh,
Should we, yeah, we can,
Show us where the highway is and where the
Right.
beach is, so to
Coronado.
orient us.
Coronado Street's here, Highway 1's here,
I thought,
Half Moon Bay's that way, San Francisco's that way, the ocean's here. This is the 13-foot high bluff that comes along. Here's where the severe erosion is occurring. Currently, the coastal trail stops here, just past Coronado, and then the bike path next to the existing riprap ends right here. So this is the 400 feet of doom, is that what you're calling it? Danger. This is the 400 feet of danger that, so Alvin can.
Okay, so now go back to the previous slide again, so people see it on the picture and
Oh.
so basically the same exact view.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so starting from the northern end, like Grant was saying, this is currently the existing coastal trail. We plan on removing a small portion of it in order to conform with our new proposed coastal trail that will run along this danger zone and connect back to the existing coastal trail on the other end. This is about a 400-foot coastal trail, and it will be, because it's within Caltrans right-of-way, it will be designed per Caltrans standards. Currently, we have estimated about 20 feet of width. And so,
what's the width of the current trail that's right there where the cursor is?
right now on the northern end, it's a 10-foot trail. The proposed coastal trail will also be 10 feet, but there is also a buffer between the trail and there will be a 5-foot shoulder with the highway, on the highway side, and another 5-foot shoulder on the ocean side.
So the trail itself is the same as what's currently there? Okay.
Yes. I believe on the southern end, the trail is slightly not as wide as the one on the northern end, but.
The southern end's wider with the split lane, yeah. It's
Oh, right. Oh, right,
fancier
sorry. I'm
trail.
the other way around. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so, because it's just 22 feet sounded like a pretty wide trail.
It's pretty wide.
But
There's
that's the
5 feet,
shoulders.
there's 5-foot buffer zone 2-foot shoulder, 10-foot trail, 2-foot shoulder, and a 5-foot,
Trail's
almost a
10
5.
foot, okay.
Yeah, so Caltrans requires quite an extensive buffer zone on either side of, for traffic, you would call that a recovery zone.
Thanks. So, starting on the northern end of the beach, we would provide additional armoring to, so right now there is existing rocks in the area, as you guys may well know, and we plan to provide additional armoring on the northern end before we continue with a new embankment of 2 to 4 ton riprap that will come down along the embankment of the proposed coastal trail. This embankment was about 150 to 160 feet wide and,
Long.
I'm sorry, I mean long. This embankment will approximately, if you, the shaded region that, right here is the approximate beach take that we're thinking that this alternative will take, and that's about 2,000 square feet. Coming, as we get closer to the bluffs on the southern end, it will be, the coastal trail will be held back, or it will be traditional fill, roadway fill, as we connect to the existing coastal trail. In terms of the staircase, we're working on a few ideas right now, but this alternative is pretty versatile in terms of where we can place it, whether it be at the end or even down the middle of the coastal trail. During construction, there will be access to the beach, like James was saying, where we will provide a temporary staircase. So down here, if it's visible, this is a cross-section of this area right here of what it would look like. So we have the coastal trail at the top of the embankment, where it will be held back by the 2 to 4 ton riprap at the bottom that's keyed into the beach. Summarizing this alternative, this embankment will be constructed with riprap to protect the coastal trail. There's about 2,000 square feet. There's about 2,000 square feet of beach take, and the coastal trail will be 22 feet wide, like we were saying, and about 400 feet long. With that being, next I'll talk about the second alternative. The view is the same as before in terms of orientation, this being Highway 1, Half Moon Bay being to the south, southeast, and San Francisco to the northwest. Again, we will be providing again, we're proposing to connect the two ends of the existing coastal trail. On the northern end, again, we'll be providing additional armoring to conform with our proposed embankment. In this alternative, to hold back the embankment of the coastal trail, we propose, or right now we're looking at proposing a sheet pile wall that will be vibrated into the beach, and there's currently, what we've seen is there's currently about 6 feet of exposure on the ocean side. So, with the erosion, there may be as much as 10 feet. So with about 10 feet of exposed face, we're thinking that the sheet pile wall will have to be vibrated about 20 feet further, making it a 30-foot long, 30-foot tall sheet pile wall. At the base of the sheet pile wall, there will be a small 6-foot trench for 2 to 4 ton riprap. This particular trench will, as erosion occurs over time, the trench will be exposed, but the riprap will slowly roll into its angle of repose to protect the embankment and the beach. So doing it this way, we have, as you can see on the plan, there's less beach take than before. There's actually little to no beach take, what we're looking at right now. There's also going to be a drainage rock layer behind the wall that will relieve the embankment side of any hydrostatic pressures over time. As we get closer to the bluffs, it will conform to traditional roadway fill. So this green area, I forgot to mention in the previous one, the edge of this green area is pretty much the toe of the fill, which is, everything in the green, currently in this area there is existing vegetation. I believe it's willows and invasive ice plant and non-native ivy. And I think there's a patch of strawberry too.
The wild strawberry,
Yeah.
endangered wild strawberry.
Some of this will be removed. The green area will have to be cleared of vegetation in order to put in the fill. But in doing so, what we actually get is we do get clearer sight distance across the coastal trail, and hopefully a better view from Highway 1.
Yeah, right now, it's a willow thicket that, it's apparent that homeless people have been encamped there. And so this would make it a safer trail for some people, probably feel safer having an open sight distance. But we would be removing a portion of that willow thicket.
Right. So, again, the staircase options are versatile with this one. If we were to come down the middle of the sheet pile, it will probably be a bigger staircase, which may require banisters. And again, temporary access will be provided during construction. So to summarize, this is a sheet pile wall that will retain the coastal trail with RSP that will help protect the erosion in this interim period, as it will slowly fall into place as erosion occurs. This alternative, what's different about this alternative, a big key of this alternative is that there is little to no beach take compared to the first one. And the coastal trail is about the same dimensions.
So now we'll take questions or comment, feedback.
Well, how I'd like to do this is council member questions, just questions. We start with that, please.
I have some.
Go ahead.
Any idea on the length, well, these are combined, let's see. A lot of these studies that'll need to be done, it seems to me that the Army Corps of Engineers and the Harbor District certainly has had a lot of different studies done. Is there some way that you're gonna be able to capitalize on those?
Go back to the picture.
I'm wondering how you're working with the Harbor District so that there isn't,
Yeah, just any
doubling up
alternative.
of effort.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have integral consultants that are doing the sand supply study, and they have access to the Army Corps' model for the dredging study that they're doing for the Pillar Point Harbor. Plus, they've generated a model for the sediment movement along the coast. And so Integral is looking at the sand supply study, incorporating what the Army Corps has already done, and then kind of adding on to that for this study to see how we would affect additionally what they've already looked at. Meaning that when we put the rock or the RSP wall, the sediment on the coast moves back and forth. Typically, it's moving down coast, the long shore drift, and then they have this breakwater that's cut it off. And so without the sand supply, we've caused this excessive erosion without refeeding it. So the Army Corps is looking at either using some of the dredge material from the Pillar Point Harbor over here to replenish the beach sand, and they haven't quite finished that study, but we've reviewed that and we've looked at that. So we have the Army Corps study. We also have some previous cultural resource study that's shown that this area is not, doesn't have any existing cultural resources. And this site right here is actually, if you go and look at it, if you actually go to the beach, you'll see there's a tire in the fill and there's chunks of asphalt. It's an old Caltrans or old highway department embankment. So it's basically an old highway department embankment sitting on top of several layers of terrace deposits, slightly cemented sand deposits that are natural. So we're not, it's not of that great concern that we're not allowing the sediment to continue to feed the beach, because it's not nice, it's not clean sediment. And so we have looked at those studies and we've reviewed those, but as far as this project, this has very small impact compared to the entire Pillar Point dredging and the sand supply on the beach.
I guess one of the things I was wondering is, obviously the erosion south of Surfers Beach is very bad. Is
Right.
there one or the other option that has less impact, or do we know what that impact would be?
Well, that's always a problem. The reason we have this problem here is because they stopped the RSP here, and you got this erosion here, and then as you see on the southern end, they stopped the riprap by the housing development. You've seen how the coast has moved. We're losing about 1 to 2 feet a year. Some people think it's even progressing faster, up to 3 feet a year now. And so some of the things that the Coastal Commission asked us to look at was what could we do at the end, some kind of treatment that would slow down this erosion. The sad truth is, I mean, wherever you stop your armament, you're pretty much stopping your protection. But in Oregon, they have done what they call a dynamic revetment, which is smaller rocks, which kind of reduces some of the impact. My personal opinion is that RSP has the quality, because it has a lot of reflective faces, that the wave energy is more absorbed than just a wall. Walls would just reflect the energy directly, so that energy, you get more energy reflected perhaps on the adjacent point where riprap may absorb some of that wave energy. And that's one of the reasons on the bottom of the sheet pile wall we would have RSP to maybe absorb some of that and also prevent a scour hole from developing below the sheet pile. But from what we've seen, the Coastal Commission seems to like the less beach take approach, and so the wall would give you less beach take, but it may not protect, may not dissipate as much wave energy. But both of those are kind of minuscule comments, because no matter what we do here, this is going to continue to erode rapidly.
Okay, and when you use you talk about it being nimble and it being interim. 2 questions. What do you think is the length of time, realistic length of time that this will be completed, and what is interim?
The project itself could be completed probably, and you guys are gonna film this, right? I would guess 8 weeks of good construction. You could construct this.
No, what I mean is like from now.
Oh,
until it's
yeah, it's a
finished.
two-part question. I'll answer
Okay.
that second part. So the construction itself would just be, from now we'd be looking at the design being complete in April and probably construction beginning in the summer. And that's more in the county. I think we're looking at construction beginning in July.
Yeah, there is an aggressive schedule on this project, and one of the reasons for that is because there's a very specific timing for Caltrans funding to apply specific to this project. They will not be able to allocate the funds that they need to construct this if this is not permitted and designed by April, so that it goes to the California Transportation Commission in June. And they have an extensive lead time to achieve that. So essentially, as soon as what we are hoping for to be approval in June, we would be looking at construction in July, August at the latest.
Okay. Is it possible for us to get a realistic rendering of what Photoshop, whatever? This is very difficult to have a sense of how this is gonna look.
I apologize for that. We have some nice photoshopped renderings of the RSP. with the staircase, and we could probably provide those through the
We
check.
don't, we all know what riprap looks like, but what does a sheet pile look at, like, from the beach?
There's probably two types that would be applicable here, and that's either a steel sheet pile facing or a concrete. And sheet pile is the, if you look at it, it's a wall that's not straight, but it's kind of half a hexagon that connects to the adjacent piece. So you have these little half hexagons of steel, basically. So it'd be about 6 feet high, and as it erodes, as the erosion approaches the wall, then it'd be about 10 feet high. So you'd have this 10-foot high, a rusty-looking steel. It kind of forms this patina of rust, but that's actually a protective coating that prevents it from rusting more rapidly. So it'd look like a kind of a rusty steel wall with RSP. But the thing, we would have a staircase that would go either over the top in the middle or else coming around from the side and down. So you could make a lot nicer type of stairs access to the beach. And we'd like to do something more imaginative than just concrete stairs, maybe incorporate rock or something so it looks more natural or just looks nicer.
Can we do something more imaginative with the wall?
Well, that's where you start, like, you're probably thinking of a shotcrete sculpted
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of.
we are.
Yeah, we are.
But that's a problem, because if it's a fill, so in order to do that, typically that kind of wall is what you call a top-down construction. So like we did those all over the place on Devil Slide and stuff, where you're building from the top down, so you're excavating, putting in a nail, and shotcreting, and then putting a secondary shotcrete coat. So it's being supported as you go down. But here, there's nothing here, so you can't build this until you have some support there. So to do that here, you would have to have a sheet pile wall, and then you would build it, and then you would come back and put this kind of facing, remove the sheet piles and put it's not the right approach here. It's more for, if you wanted to protect an existing bluff, you could do that. But if you have nothing there and you're gonna backfill behind it, then you would have to use something like these MCC walls that you see on the freeway and stuff, where they're already precast panels. So it'd be more like a precast, but then the precast panels don't quite have the same proven wave resistance. They've never really been used in a coastal environment.
When you described the construction at Devil's Slide, that's a much taller wall. This is only 6 or 10 feet tall. Does it no longer become an issue?
No, it's the same
Wow.
thing, but it's a different, there's nothing there. There's no there to build it on, so.
There's no soil to nail it to, you mean?
Exactly, so that's the type of wall that you can build if you have an existing bluff and you want to protect it. But if you're gonna build up an embankment, then it's not that type of construction. You could do like a facing, put a dead man on the back and put a facing and tie it back and then shotcrete over the facing, but then the costs go way up. And the problem also with that is that everybody's considering this as a temporary measure for this. I mean, you already have an existing RSP 400 feet, 700 feet, sorry, of existing RSP. So it doesn't seem to fit the purpose to make this one little piece, to beautify this one little piece. I mean, I don't know if.
But you already mentioned that it's just gonna keep on going. I mean, the whole Murata surf is gonna.
This is gonna continue to erode, and the Coastal Commission would like to see Highway 1 moved. And their plan, and I don't wanna speak for the Coastal Commission, but the plan is that this would be a temporary, that they would actually eventually remove this. Highway 1 would be closer up here, and all this coast would naturally be eroding away.
Well, this is an interim measure. How long is the interim?
Right.
And will the interim?
Oh, so maybe I'm mistaken.
No, you're right on track, but let me kind of jump in, just because I've been part of the conversations with the Coastal Commission. So, as everyone says, so this is an interim project. Wow, a lot more people showed up since I was up here. All right, so this is an interim measure, and so what we're looking to do is to construct a project that will allow us to protect Highway 1 while enhancing coastal access and recreation for a duration of time that will allow all the necessary stakeholders to identify what is the appropriate long-term solution. So after this is built, we anticipate having to monitor what are the effects of this, and then how does that play into what is the long-term solution. So we wouldn't be able to give a statement as to, this project will have a lifespan of X, because there are factors included that we don't know, including what's gonna happen with the Army Corps of Engineers project. So all of those are factors that will play into the life of this project. However, we are committed to having this be only an interim solution because we identify the need, Supervisor Horsley understands the need to have a long-term solution. If you leave this wall there and you don't conduct a long-term solution, then you eventually lose the beach, and that's the last thing we want. So we can't give you a number of years as far as what the lifespan of this project is, because we're gonna have to monitor all the effects and different elements that will be in play here. How's the sand moving, the sand supply, sea level rise, Army Corps of Engineers project, all of that. So
Just a
it's-
rough idea, seriously, you must have some idea about when you're gonna start looking at,
Well,
Oh, we'll start
Ocean
looking,
Curve.
we'll start.
before this next section has to be rip-wrapped, or after?
yeah,
That's what
It-
led
it
to
de-
my question.
yeah.
'Cause
Ideally-
if the reason for the riprap is because we already have riprap,
Mhm.
then that's fine, as long as this final solution happens before we go to the next section of riprap, because at some point, it might be better to switch to a more attractive material.
We agree, but we would like to see a long-term solution implemented before we start talking about putting the Shot Creek all the way down the coast. That's not our intention. So we want to do an interim project here that will allow us to allow all the stakeholders, the Coastal Commission, Caltrans, Half Moon Bay, the county, everyone needs to look at Granada Community Service District, given that they own a great proportion of land there. We need to buy time to be able to evaluate all those alternatives and see what is what's on the table here. And that's what this project aims to do, is to buy the time. And I don't have a duration of time. I mean, we don't know, we couldn't know.
Nicholas, do you know why the money for Caltrans dissolves after June 2015 for the project?
So in order to fund, going way back,
That's fine, you don't have to look at me.
So going way back when we first started this process, we worked with Caltrans, and Caltrans identified the State Highway Operation, what's SHOP stand for? State Highway Operation and Protection Program, I think it is. And so the SHOP program is what the funding for their construction is coming from. In order to do that, they had to amend the fiscal year 14-15 SHOP budget to accommodate this project. So they got the amendment in during that budget. Now, in order to access that money, we have to take the permits and the designs to the California Transportation Commission by their last meeting in June, which is the end of fiscal year 14-15. And we have to bring it to them so they can officially sign off on the funds, right? So they can't give us the funds until we have the permits. And so that's why there's this tight funding. That's why there's this tight timeline attached to the funding.
So you said that there's been many alternatives looked at. You're presenting two. Can you tell us the other alternatives that you've looked at and which alternatives you have not looked at?
The unknown knowns. The alternatives, we looked at the Shot Creek, but like I say, that's a top-down. First, I'd like to say that Nicholas had a great point. Remember, this project is an interim, almost pseudo-emergency project to protect Highway 1 access to the coast, because we're quickly losing this section of roadway. So we are Other projects, we'll have to look at the full length of the coast. But the other alternatives we consider are things that I just talked about, the MSE type wall, which is a concrete facing that has tiebacks, but hasn't been proven to be ocean worthy. Two types of sheet piles. Others, they have what they call a mass wall system. It's just a gravity wall, basically a type 1 wall, like Caltrans with the typical concrete wall, but in that case, you'd have a massive footprint and foundation. One of the guidelines we were given was that, from the Coastal Commission, that they want it easily removed. And so if you put in a system that has a large footing, a large concrete base, when you remove it, you create quite a scar, quite an imprint. It's difficult to remove. It's quite destructive, where with the rock, or the sheet pile of rock, you can easily pick up one at a time, just as it was placed, or with the sheet pile, you can pull it out, and there's not much of a scar that's left. So some of the few alternatives left, and there's also what they call these jack systems, which are these big giant concrete, they look like jacks. You've seen the child's game with the ball and the little jacks. They look like jacks, but they interlock, so you have this interlocking concrete monstrosity, but then it's difficult to kind of come up with stairs that would come down through that, and it's a whole different look to the beach.
Has there been any look on engineered fill with sand replenishment?
Oh, well, see, that's part of what the Corps, and that's one of the things we don't know. The Corps is looking at the sand supply on the beach, and that's well beyond our scope of work. Is just repairing this one small section, and the beach itself, that the Army Corps has been studying for years, looking at dredging and taking the sand from Pillar Point Harbor and placing it on the beach and allowing it to resupply the beach. And that is a good alternative, but that's nothing that's a short-term project. So we're not looking at the beach replenishment aspect of it.
Because it's gonna take too much time.
That's a
to get
huge
the
study. Yeah,
sand
the Army
from-
Corps is spending a lot of time studying that right now. So
Right,
this
and-
is an interim.
And I believe they said it was 2 to 3 years out before they have any decision on that at the earliest.
I'm just thinking about comparative costs, to build, the riprap wall, or to fill it in with engineered fill, and then forget about the dredging, but just bring sand.
Right, well, the engineered fill, and that's what, anything building that embankment is gonna be engineered, compacted 8-inch lifts, built up, in the sheet pile the same way, it's got engineered fill. But you have to have some sort of protective armament on the coast side, because the wave erosion is so intense that you have to have something to armor that. So you couldn't just keep
Sand.
piling sand out there. You would be putting a lot of sand at that one location continually. But again, that's what the Army Corps is looking at for that whole stretch of beach replenishment.
And Dan, one of the things that on top of that, one of the reasons Supervisor Worsley,
The TV won't hear you. How about go there?
one of the reasons Supervisor Worsley, started this project is because it was clear that the Army Corps of Engineers wasn't going to be ready in time to conduct a project that would provide some type of protection at this location. And so to try and kind of do what they're doing, it would take too long. There are too many regulatory issues preventing that from happening. The studies that you need to do are extremely extensive. So, that's why we're trying to do this interim project, to allow everyone, to prevent, some emergency big project from going in there. By doing this project, we're able to protect the highway, but also protect coastal access and recreation. So we're able to get in there, do a proactive project, make sure we preserve access and recreation, actually enhance access and recreation while protecting the highway. And waiting for some type of project where we could dump sand would just be too expensive, it would take way too long, and in the meantime, you'd end up losing Highway 1, and we'd end up with some type of emergency project that I don't think would take all the same things into consideration.
Dave?
Well,
Oh,
I'd just like to know if there's been any projections, if there were to have some engineered fill and sand other than from this, the dredging, from waiting for the, Corps of Engineers, any type of projections of how long that would hold, knowing that more sand would naturally fill, come and go, it wouldn't all blow away in one season. If there was enough brought in.
So at the Army Corps of Engineers presentation earlier this year, they said it was on the order of a year to 3 years before massive amounts of sand would wash away. And they didn't even know at that point where they
But that
could
was
get the sand.
without added fill though.
Well, the fill doesn't help. The sand dissipates the force of the waves before it gets to the bluff. That's what the sand does. So you don't do sand and fill unless you have something to reinforce the fill.
Do we have any more questions on
Yes,
on
I
these
did actually
alternatives?
have questions on
All
that.
right.
That's why I was raising my hand. So, off the wall for a moment, so the green area, green hatched area, if I'm looking at the drawing correctly, the contour lines are 1 foot contours, is that correct?
Yes.
So we're looking at anywhere from a foot to 6 or 7 feet of fill over the western and northern edge, is that
Right,
correct?
that would be your highest point of fill, and we haven't decided how we would terminate the wall and begin the fill. There's, you could extend the wall a little further, and reduce the size of the fill, but basically the Caltrans embankment would come out to about here, and then you would have a 2-to-1, slope, down about 6 feet. So it'd be about 12 feet wide of this,
Okay.
fill.
And that's in both alternatives, that section is pretty much the same, is that correct?
Yeah, well, yes, and, if we wanna save less, then we could put a vertical wall, but I'm always kinda resistant to putting a vertical wall next to a trail. Not just, you have a falling hazard, then you have to end up building a barrier next to it. It becomes kind of a maintenance issue, and it becomes much more expensive, if you have to have a barrier next to a trail with a vertical drop-off of over 6 feet.
Right, okay, and I want to come back to a question on the sheet pile wall. So you mentioned both concrete and steel. I quickly looked at a couple examples of both. The concrete one seems to have the same kind of problem you were talking about with a true permanent concrete solution. It's a lot harder to remove.
It's a lot harder to remove, and I'm not 100% sure that because concrete is doesn't have as much tensile strength. It's more brittle, so I'm not quite sure if I can put in a 10-foot high. Plus, with the material, I haven't done my boring to see if they could drive the concrete pile. So I know that the steel pile would work.
Right, and even on the steel, there's many different styles. And obviously, one of the concerns everybody has at this point, aside from armoring causing problems further down the line, is the appearance, because it is a heavily used beach. And some of the steel designs are quite ugly, some of them are almost tolerable. So, I guess one of the questions I would ask on that is, how much of a trade-off are you making between visual effects and obviously strength and durability?
I'm more of a believer in, I actually don't mind the look of the rock, and I know the rock works. I've used it down at Pescadero and in different locations. In the staircase, remember, it's gonna be about 10 feet wide, so it's gonna command sort of the center of attention. And the nice thing about the staircase with the RSP is that the RSP is gonna be at a 2-to-1 slope. Your staircase is gonna kind of match it, and you could do something imaginative so it looks like it's made of rock or something, and it would be, I think, more interesting. I saw some nice staircases in the coast at Sea Ranch where they took and filled it with permeable gravel. It made a nice looking staircase. So I think the staircase is gonna be, a nice solid staircase with easy access. We witnessed a couple of older women struggling to get down to the beach today, and one woman talked to me about the number of people she's seen fallen and slip, and I think if you can just provide a nice access to the beach, and remember that this is a temporary measure, and the things we've been tasked with are preserving Highway 1, connecting this trail and then providing nice, safe access to the beach, since there's no access for the 700 feet north or the almost 2,000 feet to the south.
One more question, then I'll let somebody else get in. The classic problem with stairways coming down along revetments is you get wave action, nasty storm, and all of a sudden your stairway ends 2 to 4 feet above the beach. And it's even worse than it was before. Do you think you'll be able to deal with that problem for the length of time that this is proposed, the 5-6 years?
I think so, but that's a very interesting point. When I was out yesterday, the storm surge was splashing up against here when mean high tide is supposed to be up in here. So,
Yeah.
so definitely, and as we get sea level rise and more larger storms, you're going to see a lot of that type of erosive action. So the key would be how are you going to treat your bottom. And I would probably take the stairs below the sand and bury portions of it so that if it did get exposed, it would be there. But we have many agencies that we have to satisfy, and so we have to really try to balance how much beach that we take and where our footprint ends. And if we extend it too far, then we trigger more permits that make it more difficult to get approved. So it's a real balancing act. But I understand your dilemma, and I think it can be solved with keying it in a little deeper.
Are you aware of the staircase that was built in Pacifica at the Land's End that was similar, built into the beach?
No, I'm not.
You're not familiar with it at all? Okay.
Could we stick with this?
No, it's, yeah, we're talking about staircase.
Well, I want, all right.
Okay, well, I have pictures of it in construction.
No, actually, please send it to me. We were trying to get all ideas for stairs, and I think the staircase would be whether this project looks interesting and is satisfying to the public or not. And I
Yeah.
think if
I would invite you to go over there. It's on Esplanade and Pacifica, right where the apartments were condemned, just past that, Land's End. There's a switchback and there's this large concrete staircase at the base. So
Oh,
it's-
okay.
It's good to
Thank
look
you.
at,
Thank
be familiar with.
Quickly, could you compare and contrast alternative 1 and 2 pros and cons, just briefly, so I'm getting lost, just in your own personal opinion as to which is a better option?
Okay, the pros and cons. Well, you have your aesthetics. One, you have the riprap, which will match the existing RSP. So it'll blend in to the rest of the beach, where with the sheet pile, you'll have that vertical face with some sheet pile. And so whenever you have a vertical face, you have a bluff here, but there's always the worry that kids or dogs or someone, there's the fall hazard. Well, is it any safer to fall on a 2-to-1, 2-ton RSP face? I think it's a little safer, but yeah, that's a small point. But the footprint, the key thing is that the sheet pile wall with the RSP would be a much smaller footprint, so you'd actually have more beach area. Is what makes that a winner in our opinion, and it's this is the culprit, this dark gray area where we're calling the beach take, the actual lower portion. With the RSP, you would have more beach take. If you want to slide the other, you'll see you don't have to. So here you wouldn't have, it wouldn't be as massive. It would be a little more subtle.
All right, any more questions from council members?
I just have a couple small questions. Thank you guys for working on this. I really appreciate it. I know from the meeting that we had on site that it's a good team and you guys are very enthusiastic about it, so that's definitely good to know. Just a couple of minor questions. The vegetation that's going to be removed up in the green area up there, so no vegetation will be replaced then? It's just going to be the 22 feet of roadway or trailway?
It would be mitigated. We would, of course, you'd use erosion controlled plant that 2-to-1 face. So we'd be putting back natives. There's a large area of South African ice plant that would probably be removed and planted with natives. So there would have to be some type of mitigation for the plant removal of the coastal shrub. And so we'd probably be looking at this area slightly smaller, but replacing that ivy with a native plant. There's a nice patch of, I can't remember what this strawberry, our biologist was excited by it, a native wild strawberry, coastal strawberry that seems to, that's, I believe it may, I don't know if it's endangered, but it's a species of interest. So we'd be looking at planting a native, it would have to be mitigated some.
Okay, great. In that same area, you had mentioned, what you thought was evidence of homeless people, and, that there's not homeless people living there, that's where people go to the bathroom.
Oh,
when they visit
okay,
the
maybe
beach,
that's
Yeah.
what I was.
So that, if
You
you
have
had,
the willows down
Yeah,
there,
it's the
there's no
restroom.
place to go to the
well,
bathroom.
and so I've never like made my way up through those dense willows there. But I do know there's a little arroyo right there.
There's
and
a
so-
draw here, you can see it.
Yeah, my question is that draw from just wave action pushing up, or is there some kind of pipe or drainage coming down that's gonna undermine whatever fill you put in there?
Well, it's very slow, but there's actually a pipe that comes out here, and there's an outlet that sort of comes here, and this water sort of makes its way back, and then just sheet flow from this area just kind of goes down that area. I'm not sure why that bowl formed. I suspect that when they built the highway, there was an embankment for the highway, and then there was this cliff here, and just over time, erosion coming down from here and back here has just sort of created this soft bowl. But that's a good point. But the thing about the wall, you would have this drainage layer behind it, so you would be collecting that groundwater and taking it out through the face, through the series of weep holes. So you shouldn't have that problem. There's no evidence of erosion now, so it doesn't get a large amount of flow, so I wouldn't be that concerned.
Okay, thank you.
But something would have to be done at this toe to take care of that water that does come into that.
Okay. Let's see. So without a, kind of a visual, picture of this besides these engineering diagrams, as a person that's not into construction, rock slope protection retaining wall. When I look at the cross-section diagram, it looks like there's some kind of face on top of the riprap, on top of the rocks.
That was kind of a misprint. We shouldn't have said wall. That's just RSP. No, that's not. That's just a theoretical 2-to-1 slope.
So the RSP, let's just make sure. I'm
Right,
using
and
the right
I've seen in areas where we have vegetated the RSP, but because it's under wave action, you couldn't put any soil or vegetation on the riprap.
So the RSP is going to look like further north, with just
Exactly.
big boulders there.
Exactly.
All right. And, Alvin, you mentioned that, and pardon me if you've already addressed this, in the process slide in this, that there's permitting and there's several agencies listed there. And Alvin, maybe it was just the words, but you said that some of these may be at play. Do we know exactly which ones will be at play?
We're eliminating them as we go. Like the Army Corps is triggered if you do any excavation below the mean high watermark. So we're trying to avoid that. And so we don't think that's in play. We visited with Fish and Wildlife yesterday, and they don't see any concerns with the sea mammals, but we didn't talk to the Fish and Wildlife for the land mammals. They were unavailable. The Marine Sanctuary, that shouldn't be if we're not going to be on the beach with equipment or get below the water tide, we shouldn't generate any concerns from the Marine Sanctuary. And then the San Francisco Regional Water Control Board, if we don't have water running off our project into a stream, then that shouldn't be triggered either.
Okay, so we're not quite sure yet, but this week, we'll have this understood before the funding window for the council?
Yes, those are, we've now almost completed all of our studies, and then our environmental company, ICF, will be preparing an environmental assessment, which Caltrans and the Coastal Commission will review, and will apply for what permits are deemed necessary at that time.
Okay, and last question for you, Grant. With either of the alternatives, what is gonna be the impact to traffic flow on Highway 1 there? And is one of the alternatives have less impact on traffic flow than the other?
Okay, go back, that's a good point, I didn't even talk about it, can you go back to the slide to the slide? Either one of these is fine. Yeah, basically, the idea would be we wanna minimize, any impact to Highway 1. This was the first evening I've seen rush hour traffic, I guess, in Half Moon Bay. I was caught, so I understand, your concerns. So with the RSP, what we've done in the past, you have to have a crane sit and unload the rocks, and so you have a truck back up, and they usually unload it off the rock and place it. It's called Method A construction. You place it on each individual rock is placed on the beach. So the idea would be that the crane would sit off the road. There is enough shoulder in this area that I think the approach would be to build a slight detour of trying to shift Highway 1 over so that you can still have 2 lanes of traffic. And there would be, when you're bringing trucks in, you would have a flagman that would have to allow direct traffic to allow him to get in there. But the idea was, I think we can build both of these with keeping both lanes open, with maybe some temporary closures. Building the path itself, I think if we have a slight detour in place that we could, I don't know the impact on the left-hand turn at Coronado with the detour. We haven't looked into that yet, but even with the sheet pile approach, we would most likely delay us a little bit, but the sheet pile driver would sit here, he'd drive his piles, and then we'd build out the embankment, then he'd move out to that section and build the next, so that way we wouldn't have to be on Highway 1 to build it. So it'd be a slightly slower process, but it would eliminate traffic delays and closures.
Well, maybe traffic closures, but
But-
with
yeah,
the
yeah.
crane and flagman, there's gonna be delays. So then the next question, follow-up to that would be, is this gonna be a daytime project?
And that hasn't been determined yet, and that's what we have to look at, Chris, is how we're gonna construct it, and then try to minimize that. Typically, if we do have closures, then, you know, they would follow Caltrans guidelines for this location of when they could do the closures, and most likely, a lot of the work would probably take place at night, but then you'd have to consider the noise. So that would be up to a lot of you also, whether you'd want some noise at night or daytime in between peak flows, traffic delays.
Thank you, Grant, appreciate it.
Back to the shotcrete alternative, you said it really wasn't doable. If you added engineered fill, then you would have something to anchor the shotcrete wall,
That's why I
correct?
said you
But
could-
this would be cost prohibitive, or,
It'd be more expensive.
okay, by how
And-
much?
I don't know yet, but
Oh, okay.
it'd be probably just guesstimating, throwing out the cost of the path is all the same. It would be at least double the cost for just that. I mean, just taking the rock and placing it compared to building because you'd have to build a wall and a fill behind it, and then you'd have to come back and do the decorative shotcreting and sculpting secondary. So it would be just added cost, and it would take longer. And the one thing, spraying concrete on the coast, there's a zero tolerance for leakage and spillage onto the coast, so there would be an enormous amount of effort that the contractor would have to do to prevent any, because shotcrete's a spray, almost liquid, so there's a lot of runoff. So he would have to be able to collect that and prevent any spillage from getting onto the beach without facing major fines. So my thought process is that I don't even want to go there
But it is.
I mean, anything's possible
Yeah.
with enough money and engineering.
All right, I'd like to open public comment. Neil Merrilees. And after Neil, Mike Wallace.
Thank you for coming here. Thanks for presenting. And I think we all understand it a little bit more. I wanted to add a couple of things, and that is something we didn't really get into, but the Army Corps is getting into, that the erosion at this particular point is not a natural process. It's because of the breakwater that they put in Pillar Point Harbor. So, you know, if we just allow Highway 1 to go away here, it will go pretty far, and I don't think Caltrans wants to move Highway 1 20 feet. I think they would move it so that it would be there for 50 years, which would be quite a way in. So I think the consequences of doing nothing at this point, when we're just about to lose it, is great. So I would encourage everybody to think about all these options, and I think personally that we have to do something. And if it were up to me, I would do something that looks the most natural, and I know none of these is natural. But since there's riprap there already, I guess I would lean that way. I'd hate to look at a 10-foot steel vertical wall when I was at the beach, and I'd really worry about waves hitting a vertical wall and then reflecting back and scooping out more sand. I mean, one of the reasons the erosion is so bad at this area is because the waves hit the breakwater and reflect. And so if there's some way to mitigate that reflection, if we did use sheet steel, then maybe we would have to dump sand at the bottom of the sheet steel to mitigate the reflective. And the other thing I wanted to say is that whatever we do should be covered up with sand. And I know that's not your department, that you're not looking at this, but as a community, we have a problem, and the problem is sand loss at Surfers Beach. And we know where the sand is. It's right inside the harbor. And somehow, by putting pressure on the Harbor District or electing new members of the Harbor District or getting rid of the Harbor District, but some way we need to get the sand on the beach where it belongs. And whether it stays there 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, that's where it belongs. And there's not an unlimited amount of sand that's being scooped away. We can see how much sand is being scooped away every year. Every year there's a little bit less. You know, maybe there's 6 inches less every year. It's not 10 feet every year. We know how much is going away. If you look back at pictures 10 years ago, there's more sand there. So if we did place a bunch of sand there, it would be better. And so whatever we decide, it would be nice to put a little paragraph at the end of it saying, this is our temporary emergency measure, but what we really need to do now is to put sand in front of whatever apparatus we put there. So thank you very much for coming and presenting. Thanks.
Thanks. Mike?
Hi there, I'm Mike Wallace. I'm representing the Surfrider Foundation, and I'm also coach of the high school surf team here and avid users of that exact location. I want to applaud the council for their excellent questions. You know, I share a lot of the same concerns about the aesthetics here. There are also some engineering questions that I would have, and that is the existing riprap, a lot of it has ended up in the lineup where we surf, and it's a real hazard for a lot of the kids that surf in that area. So one point I'd like you to address possibly is, you know, how you can convince us that this would be secured if it's loose rock.
Can I answer one question at a time?
Sure.
To that point, yeah, and I think the rocks you're talking about are on the very north end.
They actually kind of run parallel to the highway.
Right,
And there's
on
a
the
couple
very-
patches, but at low tide you'll see like almost a peninsula coming
Right.
north
What-
and south.
What you're actually seeing there is when they actually built the breakwater, when they initially had the concerns, they built out a little portion right there parallel to Highway 1, which didn't do anything, and it eroded behind it. And so you can see at low tide, and from Google, you can see that still there. And then they built the riprap in the pretty much right after they built the breakwater, they rip-wrapped Highway 1, but they didn't do a very good job in that they didn't have a filter fabric behind it, and they just kind of set it there. And so then in the 90s, Caltrans came back and just put a bunch more rock right on top of that. And so a lot of the rocks you're seeing were from that original, but that's an excellent point. And you size the rock so it doesn't walk away, is what we call it. And so you're looking at like 4-ton rock that won't walk away. But part of any time you do a riprap is a yearly monitoring program where you physically watch. And the idea is that if you do see rocks begin to walk away, that you would retrieve them and pull them back and replenish the beach. But I mean, that's an excellent point. And
Yeah, right in that corner, the cement path is actually cracking and caving in as well
Right.
as it
the
deteriorates.
cement they added, I think in 2000s, and that was because the waves were breaking over the riprap and bringing the fines out through the riprap and leaving these voids, and they tried to just fill it with concrete. And I know exactly what you're talking about, where the concrete that they placed was undermined and it's now caved.
Thank you. Another couple quick points, if I could make. I think it's a really, really important time to put some signage along the highway for crossing for pedestrians, because there's no way to cross safely other than do the death march, and we have kids doing that, day in and day out. And there's just, there's no flashing lights, there's no pedestrian crossing signs. So, that may be outside the scope of this project, but it's a really important time to consider that, whether it be some sort of tunnel under, pathway over, and that may be more long-term, but for us, that's a really important issue.
I noticed that with the 4 or 5 visits I've made so far at the death march.
Which also, again, maybe out of the scope, but the pole parking in that area, and making that crossing, I think, is really important for safety. Then I would also make a point, sad but true, there really is not a lot of beach left in front of this area. And I also went down and took photos from end to end at high tide, and not even that large a swell. And even in the summer, it's mostly just clay underneath, and there are actually cracks and fissures in the clay where people were twisting their ankles and so forth. So that's the sad truth about the sand. The beach that you're protecting there really isn't a beach anymore. And then the erosion south is going to be much greater than you estimated. The Army Corps estimates 88 inches a year, based on the amplification from the jetty. And that area, I think we all realize that's going to deteriorate really quickly. Not to say that this isn't an important and timely project, but I think that's underestimating some of the erosion.
No, and that's an excellent point, and that was a gross estimation.
Yeah.
And just like I think Neil brought up the point about the existing erosion is much higher to the north to the south, and there's a great graphic that the Army Corps did to show that the natural erosion is this log spiral curve.
Exactly.
And then when they built the breakwater, this log spiral curve is beginning at the base of the breakwater. So you get much higher erosion at this north end to the south end. And then the other thing that's interesting to note is the breakwater cut off Denniston and Deer Creek, which supplies all that sediment. You're losing about 10,000 cubic yards of sediment per year, mostly sand from those creeks. It's now just being dumped into the harbor.
And one final question would be, as this is an El Nino year, and I think there's a fairly good chance a lot of the signs we're seeing, we're going to get a lot more storm action this year. I'm really, really glad that this is going forward as quickly as it is for whatever reason. But what would you do, if we did have a king high tide and we did have a very large swell from the west that already, damaged this before you could operate on, before you could move forward on the project? Is that going to change?
Well, that would change everything.
Yeah.
Then it would become
Caltrans.
what Nicholas said at Caltrans, and I used to work for Caltrans, and we did the Pescadero job under those same circumstances, and it would be close the road, bring in large rock, and start
A stoplight.
a stoplight, one-way traffic control, and you'd be having this meeting with Caltrans. And
Okay. Thanks very much.
Lisa, could you clarify the role of condition management study for his question about crossing?
You can get up after Leonard and ask that. I didn't understand what you're saying. Leonard, you're next.
Normally I wouldn't wear the Capitol podium, but part of the solution is printed on new harbor commissioners, a significant part of the solution. Made a bunch of notes during the presentation. Okay, first of all, do you guys know that riprap always fails? That's essentially a quote from Kendall Joy at a January 2000 Midcoast Council special meeting, where he talked
Right,
about
that's why you would have a continuous maintenance. It's a moving thing.
Okay, then the next point is riprap, and you know, you're calling this coastal protection device. That's a euphemism like bathroom tissue. It's toilet paper. This is armoring. Call it armoring. Okay? So the next point about armoring is that it always, and I underscore always, increases erosion at the ends. So then you have to keep extending the armoring, and eventually you're going to have 1,100 miles of armored California coast, which is why I'm always opposed to armoring for any reason of any type. Now, the solution here is to dynamite the breakwater. And everybody knows that, but nobody's willing to say it out loud except me. You have to fix the breakwater. Ken LaJoy said he could design a better breakwater in 5 minutes on the back of a napkin. The breakwater was designed wrong. It needs to be redesigned so that it doesn't reflect the wave energy that carved the original Half Moon Bay. It's now carving a new Half Moon Bay, and it's going to take out a major chunk of El Granada. There's no distance that you can move the highway to keep it safe if you let me pick the number of years, okay? You want to move it to a 50-year thing? I'll say, okay, what's going to happen in 100 years? You're not going to move the highway 500 feet inland. Therefore, you have to fix the breakwater. You say interim. Well, I guess you covered interim, so I'll skip that. Okay. And you already covered the riprap at the RV lot failing. It's been failing for years, by the way. Relative to the crown of the highway, how high is this sheet metal wall going to be?
It would be about the same height.
So it's not going to be above, the top of the wall is not going to be above the crown of the highway, so there's going to be no view on the, no impact on the view.
Right.
Okay. Good. And if you want, I've been going out after every storm season, which means I haven't done it in 3 years, and taking photos up and down Murata Surf and Surfers Beach documenting the erosion. And I think there's a historic stream there, but now the seaward side of it is almost totally gone. There used to be a parking lot in the city of Half Moon Bay, and there's been 30 feet of erosion in the last 15 years, and so that's all gone. Now, I just emailed Lisa and a couple other council members some letters that I found in GSD files a few years ago. I don't remember what I was poking around for. First one's dated February 23rd, 1970. And it's a letter from the Harbor District to, it appears to be GSD's council, saying, yeah, we recognize that there's a threat to your pump station. GSD used to have a pump station there, okay? The pump station is long gone.
Leonard.
Okay, just another minute. So there's some back and forth stuff, and then the key one, the most damning one, is April 28th, 1981, a letter from Caltrans to an engineering firm. The first paragraph in its entirety reads, "This is to advise you that we have canceled our permit application for the proposed seawall project to provide protection to State Route 1 in El Granada." And the second paragraph starts out and explains that they couldn't find an appropriate source of sand. Well, fire the Harbor District General Manager, get rid of all of the commissioners.
All right, thanks,
and
Leonard.
we'll have sand.
Len, did you have something to say?
Lynn Erickson from El Granada. The first was just a function, I think, of the council. We had a question from the speaker about crossing of Highway 1. I believe that's still part of the congestion management project, so I'd just like him to know what that status is, or it's been removed already. Okay. And that was based on the comment from the public. So there's no plans for crossing. Safety, right. It was in part of a project, but Supervisor Horsley and others took initial comment and decided to remove it from the project, correct? So there's no plan.
Anything else?
The other one is, so your comment was, just make sure I capture it correctly, that if the coastal commission had their druthers, they would move highway in a significant distance. Is that fair summary?
I believe that to the point, as LaJoy said, that riprap in armoring the coast is, they want a more natural progression, a more dynamic coast, so that you have the beach replenishment naturally, which comes from eroding of the coast. And so it's my understanding that at Pescadero, the Coastal Commission would prefer us to have, when I was with Caltrans, to move Highway 1 almost a mile inland as a desired objective.
And so it's fair to assume that if Caltrans has their druthers, that would be their approach as well?
Caltrans would probably want to armor the heck out of it and keep Highway 1 right where it is. I can't speak for Caltrans, but I would just assume that they like where it is. It's already in place, and people, and they would prefer to armor it and protect it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay,
I just had a question.
you gotta come up to the microphone and just please tell us your name and your town.
Yeah, Ellen Coland, I live in El Granada. I had a question about the walkway. You were saying that it would take approximately 20 feet. And when you walk along that narrowest section by Surfers Beach, there's probably 4 feet there.
Right.
So how far into our current beach will this whole project come? If you have to have an additional 20 feet for a walkway?
We look at the cross section, and so from the curve of the road to 22 feet, that would be that point right along there. So then the question becomes, do you want to put a sheet pile wall, which would give you a vertical face there, which doesn't take any beach, or you put the RSP at a 2-to-1 from that 6-foot-high slope that comes out onto the beach.
And so the riprap then would come out how far into the beach?
Basically, we're assuming that the beach would continue to erode, and that would give you about a 10-foot vertical face. So at a 2-to-1 slope, you'd have about 20 feet, but that's not from the beach, it's from this point here. And so the beach technically is about 7 feet, so you'd be looking at, is that about 13 feet, Alan? You'd be looking about 13 feet onto that. In the wintertime, there's no sand, and it's that exposed terrace deposit, the dark black terrace
Right.
deposit that forms a little bench. So it would be out onto that.
So many times of the year then there would be no beach at all?
During high tide, there's no beach right now, and it would be similar. And then, so you'd be losing about 13 feet.
Ed?
Hi, Ed Lorenis, also from Surfrider. I just have a couple of questions. With the two alternatives, have you looked at, so the rock, you know, because you put the rock there, how much beach you're going to take. But with the vertical wall, with the coastal processes, how long will it be before the beach is gone? Because you're going to lose more beach faster with that vertical wall.
Well, yeah, well, that won't come into play until this is actually eroded and it actually hits the wall. So, I mean, right now, just doing a gross estimate, I was saying 2 feet. I think someone said that maybe it was up to 88 inches per year. So it's only about 7 feet. So that's just a few years away that this would be exposed. But the idea would be that you'd have buried RSP. And so as it got exposed, you'd have this small, the RSP is about 3 foot in diameter, but you'd have this small 3 foot high RSP at the base of the wall.
Right, so
in about 2 or 3 years probably. And they would erode, here it's already would be exposed, and then as you get down here, this would be exposed over time.
So in that time frame, would you lose less beach than you would with the
Well, you wouldn't lose, you wouldn't be losing beach, you would be losing this, the bluff to the south. And whoever brought up the point that whenever you do any any type of modification to nature, you're going to change the dynamics of nature, and there's gonna be a consequence for any action. You're exactly right. But there's also, if you don't do it, the consequence is that the erosion occurs and you lose Highway 1, you
Oh,
start
yeah, I
losing
understand
property.
that, but my question is this, if you look to the north where the rock, where we've already lost sand, right?
Right.
At high tide now, not even at high tide, but at
Well-
at a medium tide, there's no beach, it's just water.
Then that's
And that's
not,
gonna, let me finish.
okay, sorry.
And what's gonna happen is, either with rock or with this wall, what's gonna happen is that loss of beach is just gonna progress, even before you get to the bluffs. That sand's gonna continue to erode, and with time, even at medium tide, the ocean will reach that wall or rock. And so my question is related to that, is with time, you will undoubtedly lose the beach.
The beach loss is not a consequence of the rock. The beach loss is a consequence of the lack of sediment that's feeding the beach, which used to come from Deer Creek and Denniston Creek and the bluffs to the north of the pier, which the breakwater has cut off and removed. It's, these rocks, the only sand these rocks are preventing from the beach is the sand that's behind the rocks.
Right, so I think you guys are saying the same thing from different directions.
Essentially.
Basically, when the waves hit the rocks, there's a lot more energy, it carries more sand back out, so the sand on the beach is reduced. And so you end up with essentially water level being deeper. But if you had replenishment, that wouldn't occur, so.
Right,
we're
no,
both saying the
and
same
that's what I'm
thing.
saying, it's the replenishment that's the key. It's not, no matter what you put here is not affecting the beach sand. The beach sand is a consequence of longshore transport
I understand
of
that,
sand.
but there is no replenishment.
Exactly,
And
because
you cannot
the,
plan for that to happen. I'm gonna
right, so
assume
that's
that
what I'm
that's not
saying,
gonna
neither
happen.
alternative will affect that.
Okay, so you're saying that actually you did say in your very beginning of your presentation that the rock absorbs wave energy, and so you get less loss of sediment.
Less erosion to the adjacent areas. The waves hit the wall and then they're reflected, and that energy attacks the adjacent portion. So with the riprap, you have a lot of different faces. So the energy's more absorbed in the riprap and it's not translated to the adjacent bluff.
Okay, so
Not that it causes the sand below it to be eroded more quickly.
okay, so let me make sure I understand. So what you're saying is that regardless whether it's rock or a wall, the loss of sand in front of it will be the same. Is that what you're saying?
Right, the loss of sand here is not a consequence. It's a very minor consequence of the rock here, only because it's not allowing this to erode and feed the beach.
Okay.
The loss of the beach is from not having the sand from Deer Creek and Denniston Creek, which used to come into
Yeah, I
the
understand.
thing and be transported down the beach.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have, we're running late and we got another whole item here. Do you have something really quick, Len?
When you described the coastal trail, you have this project ending where there's currently about a 5-foot sidewalk that goes
Okay.
above the riprap?
Right here.
Right. And you would not affect the trail going north from there, it would stay in its current conformation?
Right, I think that we would recommend that this end piece be removed so that you can have a better conform. This is sort of in violation of Caltrans. They like to have a wider gap between the roadway and the trail, so I would recommend just moving this end piece a little bit so that you're not just conforming into this smaller.
Thank you. So the point I want to emphasize to Nicholas is that what you've done, the 400 feet of danger was in effect a dangerous area, but because traffic was going both ways, both bicycle and foot traffic. Now you've improved that area so it's wide, it's 20 feet, but now you have an endpoint right at that sidewalk where now everything has to compress to 4 feet in width plus the
No,
highway?
it's still a 10-foot trail here.
But you've got 10 feet where you have bicycles going both ways and people going both ways. And they're coming along is it really 10 feet of concrete there?
No, it's asphalt, but we measure it here and it's 10 feet. And I thought it was
Okay.
8 feet here, but I know it's 10 feet definitely where I'd like to.
Just looks to me like people may hit that at a higher speed and there'll be more congestion there, right when it happens. Because now it's sort of diffused, but.
Oh, well, you already talked beyond your 3 minutes.
The average erosion rate of Marata surf is 3.5 feet a year over the long term. In this particular location, at the end of Coronado, the erosion rate in some years is 0, but a few years ago, in 2 back-to-back storms, 10 feet disappeared, and I think I have the photographic evidence.
Right, no, and you're exactly right. Erosion occurs in catastrophic events. So when you say a 2 foot a year, it's not like gradually occurring, but when you have these major storms, you get major erosion.
Could you tell us what type of engineered fill you're gonna use in that green portion where you said will be sloped? Can you give us the specifics of that engineered fill that will be used?
That would probably be a standard embankment with the topsoil.
Base rock?
No, not base rock, more like an AS4, which is the Caltrans spec, or probably more the Caltrans embankment spec, which is about equal portions of clay, silt, and sand with some aggregate. And then on the outer face, you'd probably put about 1 foot of topsoil with a jute mesh netting for erosion control and allow plants to reestablish on that face.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
I would like to close the public comment, and I want to wrap this up really quick. We're running late. If the council members want to have any consolidated thoughts that they want to impart at this point in like 30 seconds, or we can be done. You got anything, Chris? Dave? Laura?
The only thing I want to mention is the trail surface, and I know that you're going to say, oh, it's asphalt here, and it's asphalt here, and wow, if there was any way we can have some say about that, because nobody's crazy about the asphalt. And Madam Chair, if we could just have a wrap-up of where this goes from here, so we know what happens next with the project.
I just wanted to say, the willows, they really hold the soil, and you might consider just trimming them. They're really salt tolerant. I mean, to just rip them out, maybe it'd be better to have all those roots in that ground, just saying.
Oh,
As far, and you know, okay, as I came in here tonight, I mean, in my heart, I wanted to look the faux bluff treatment, but I also understand the urgency of this project. And just from listening to you talk of these 2 alternatives, it sounds like maybe the riprap, can't believe I'm saying this, is the better of the 2, but you know, whatever. Anyhow, we really need to move on to the next item. Is everybody okay? Okay.
When's the next meeting gonna be?
Yeah. What's the next step?
Nicholas,
We
what's
are-
the next step?
We gotta do additional studies, they gotta do additional designs. These are just concepts we need to make significant ground. My guess is probably early 15.
All right, thanks.
Do we get a choice on these alternatives? Are we getting a choice on this?
That's what your final, you want to give your choice? Say it now, quick.
Oh, no, I'm just asking, is this part of the process? I'm trying to understand
This
the
is
process.
it, this is it. They're hearing from us now. If you've got any final words, say them now.
Okay,
Are you done?
I'm done.
All right. Moving on to the next item. You want to shuffle your people, or what?
Thank you, folks.
thank you.
Can't the council comment on this? I mean, I don't know what's
That's what, that
happening.
was your time?
No, hold on
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
second. Wait. No, this is not, okay. What happens next and where else do we comment?
Yeah.
And does the council comment or what?
I would do it during coffee, but I gotta take the notes.
This isn't the only meeting that we have to discuss this. You guys will be seeing us again. Like feedback, take that.
Okay, we're getting started again. Next item on our, please take your seat. Next item on our agenda is Connect the Coast Side, or the Comprehensive Transportation Management Plan, presentation and discussion of the build-out analysis. Hello? We're in our meeting now. Desired outcome is to gather feedback on the draft report and community priorities for a balance of development and transportation needs. James?
Thank you, Lisa, Chair, and Council. For those who may have arrived after the first item, I'm James Hinkamp with the San Mateo County Planning and Building Department. I'm also project manager for the Connect the Coast Side project, which is also known as the Comprehensive Transportation Management Plan. This will be the second time that we've been able to present to the MCC in late August. We introduced the project as an overview, and to refresh, it is a requirement of the local coastal program as part of the Midcoast update that was recently approved. We were tasked with developing a transportation management plan that would essentially analyze and then also strategize future land use development and traffic associated with that development for the Midcoast area. The study area spans Devil's Slide in the north down to, including Half Moon Bay, the city of Half Moon Bay. And it primarily focuses on Highway 1 and then also Highway 92, east to west, all the way to Highway 280. And so we're really trying to generate strategies and alternatives that will eventually help preserve the coastal amenities that we have here, and also to be able to better determine what the future of the region will look like. At this point, we are here to present additional information based on data collected over the summer. We kicked off in the late spring, and as recently as September, we were able to develop a draft report, and that has been vetted on a technical level by over 24 agencies around the county. And the MCC has a representative who has been able to comment, and we are formulating those comments as we meet tonight. An additional revision to the report will be available soon. And as part of that revision, based on all the feedback we will collect on the analysis, we hope to introduce some of the potential alternatives that we may pursue down the road to actually be able to solve the problem we have before us. So we have a couple consultants here who are helping us with this project. Our lead is DKS Transportation. This is Bill Loudon. And then our land use specialist is Peter Winch with Diet and Batia. So without further ado, I'll hand it over.
Okay, we'll go through the presentation fairly quickly because I know you have a lot of questions and we want to allow plenty of time for that. James hit on the purpose quite well. I may add a few points to that. We did an existing transportation conditions assessment. We'll provide a little bit of information about what we found there. But probably the most important thing that we've done is a build-out analysis. What is the total build-out potential of this area given the zoning? That's important because this project will look at what that build-out would generate in new travel if it were all built out, and then what effect that travel would have on the level of service of the transportation facilities. Because the local coastal program requires that there be a balancing of the development with the transportation facilities, and that the standards of level of service not be exceeded by that. So we did a traffic projections and looked at where there would be deficiencies given existing facilities. And then we've started to look at identify some of the possible alternatives for consideration to address those deficiencies, although that part is just really beginning for our study. So again, the plan is designed to measure, to identify measures to ensure that future residential and non-residential development can be supported by a transportation system and infrastructure, and that there be a process for evaluating that to make sure they are in balance, or to reduce the development potential if there isn't funding for transportation projects that can maintain standards. This project is not the first transportation project to be done in this area. There's been a lot of great work, and we are very committed to coordinating with other studies that were done. One that was very important was the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Improvement Studies. That was done in 2 different phases, really generated a lot of good recommendations for options to improve on the situation, and a number of those are being carried forward in the Highway 1 Congestion Management Project that the county is leading. The city of Half Moon Bay is going through a general plan update, and DKS helped them update the circulation elements. So we've been involved for about a 4-year period on transportation. And the issues, Plan Princeton is being led by Diet and Bhatia, and that certainly is taking transportation into consideration. There's an ongoing San Mateo County congestion management plan and program development, and there's also a recreational parking assessment being done by the National Park Service. So we will be working with all of those efforts that are going on and trying to integrate them. In our current conditions assessment, we did quite a bit of new data collection and tapped into some data that had been collected by those other efforts. We looked at what the traffic flow is and the level of service. We looked at local bus services, quality, location, frequency of the service, where there are pedestrian and bicycle facilities, access points, and routes. And also looked at available parking. One of the requirements of the local coastal program is that access to the coastline and the recreational facilities be maintained. So part of what our study is looking at is how do you maintain access, and parking, bicycle and pedestrian access, as well as access by transit and traffic are all being considered here. We ended up evaluating 48 different intersections along Highway 1, State Route 92, and Main Street in Half Moon Bay, and there were also 47 segments of Highway 1 and State Route 92 that we collected, which we collected data and evaluated existing level of service. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes of what we found. In transit services, there are only two fixed routes, the 17 and the 294. There's fairly infrequent service, particularly on the weekends. It's mostly weekday oriented. There's a lack of special event services and shuttles for the recreational users. These are things we're looking at as possible additional options. And pretty limited regional connections to BART or Caltrain or to other job centers. In the pedestrian conditions within neighborhoods, there are pretty good pedestrian networks developed, but there's a lack of continuity between communities and developments that needs to be addressed. Many of the sidewalks don't meet ADA standards, but probably the most important thing that's already been raised in the meeting here tonight earlier was improved crossing of Highway 1 is very critical. It's a major connector in the region, everybody recognizes that, but it's also a pretty significant barrier to east-west pedestrian movement, so we are certainly focusing on that. We've also looked at where there have been collisions that have involved pedestrians or bicycles. This graphic shows where collisions were recorded over the past 5 years. It's probably a very minimum. Those often are not reported, so often the number of crashes is more than what shows up in the official record books.
Sorry, can you go back to the last one? Can you help us understand the coding there? I can't read.
Blue is bike and red is.
Yeah, the red are where there are where pedestrian involved collisions, and the blue bicycle involved collisions, and a circle is a fatality, and I believe there was just one in Maine on 92 in Half Moon Bay.
But what are the metrics of that? Is that just in 1 year, in the past 2 years? One
Those were
each?
in one over the 5-year period.
One each?
One each.
At the locations over 5 years, okay.
Right. In the area of bicycling, there are major gaps in the network. Again, Highway 1 is a major connector, but it lacks designated bicycle facilities. We've also found that there is a lack of bicycle parking at major destinations, including the recreational facilities. parking, we have done an inventory of parking facilities with, again, the emphasis being on the coastline and the recreational facilities. This wasn't designed to be a comprehensive parking assessment, but we found that there there's parking at most of the beaches. In some cases, there are fees charged, but there's generally not enough parking to satisfy all the parking demand, particularly on weekends and peak recreational times. We also found that there's a need for more wayfinding signage to indicate where the parking is that's available. So and our report describes in more detail the baseline existing conditions of transportation, but that's really just a starting point. The real work in here is to do the build-out analysis of land use, take that, project the travel that would produce over the next 25 years, and then load that on the network and see what the difference is and what problems that causes. Peter Winch and the Diet and Bhatia team have been doing this build-out analysis. They've also, as I said, been working with Princeton and Half Moon Bay, so they're very familiar with the land use issues here. And I'll turn it over to Peter to talk about the build-out analysis.
Thanks, Bill. So build-out, when we refer to build-out, we're talking about what could reasonably but conservatively be built under existing zoning in this project area. And I'll sort of walk through the methodology briefly that we used to estimate build-out, and then we'll get into the results a little bit before going back to look at the traffic implications of that potential development. So the build-out analysis is a multi-step process, and the first step is identifying the potential sites where development may happen reasonably. So we looked at vacant land, we looked at underutilized land, which would be typically commercial sites with low built value compared to assessed built value compared to land value, and residential land on very large parcels with residential, more conventional residential zoning. We separated out parcels that have existing proposed development projects on them, and we calculated those based on what is actually being proposed on those parcels. And then the assumptions are slightly different between the sub-areas, which I'll get into in a second. The next step after identifying where development might take place is to make projections about the density and intensity that future development is likely to have on each parcel. And density is the measure. You may or may not be familiar. It's traditionally the measure of residential development, and it's done in units per acre. And intensity is a measure for non-residential development is floor area ratio, so how much floor area per land area on the site. The assumptions that are used in the build-out analysis are based on existing zoning and the local coastal plans that are in place, and on typical density and intensity of development that's on the ground. So for example, I think the maximum allowed by zoning is more useful and applicable for residential development. Just sort of like often in a residential zone, it will be built closer to the maximum, whereas non-residential development tends to be, the regulations tend to govern the way buildings sit on the land and how much parking is required and so on. So it's often makes more sense to go to what's typical. Then we had to make certain assumptions about employees per square foot in order to get to sort of a reasonable estimate for jobs. We tried in the methodology to be consistent with the current local coastal programs. The Midcoast LCP, of course, was updated relatively recently in 2012 and finally adopted in 2012. Half Moon Bay is a little older. We used certain specific assumptions from each of those. We tried to incorporate those into our methodology as well. The study area, as I think James first said, starts up at Devil's Slide and goes all the way to the south end of Half Moon Bay and over to 280. So it's a large area that we're talking about. In terms of the transportation arteries, we really are focused on Highway 1 and 92, but there's a larger catchment area of potential development that feeds these roads. These were analyzed for the purpose of build-out in sub-areas, and the reason for that is that partly it has to do with the local coastal plans, and partly it has to do with the different planning efforts underway in these study areas. So Half Moon Bay, the city of Half Moon Bay, the general plan update is currently in process, and we're also involved in that, so that is its own sub-area. These maps show zoning, and if you look at them closely in the report, you can see the vacant and underutilized sites are outlined as well. The Princeton sub-area, which is also undergoing a current planning process and has been carved out of the Midcoast sub-area, as we're calling it, which is the rest of the Midcoast LCP area, which is Montera, Moss Beach, Elgranada, and Miramar. And finally, the rural lands, which are of course the largest area, but have the least potential for development because they are rural and have rural zoning. So, summarizing the results of crunching all the numbers that result from those assumptions and that analysis, we would conservatively see, with the current zoning, if all of these sites were developed at a reasonable density or intensity, we'd see an overall increase of about 51%, or about 4,300 units, residential units. The greatest amount of capacity is in the Midcoast sub-area, again, which is Elgranada, Moss Beach, Miramar, what am I missing? Montera. So we'd see a 66% increase in the Midcoast, about 2,600 units. Half Moon Bay, a smaller number and a smaller percentage increase. And residential development in Princeton would also grow by about 45%, because we're assuming that 1 in 4 parcels in the waterfront zone would have caretaker units, and we're counting those as residential. Non-residential development, we would see an overall increase of about 2.7 million square feet, which would translate in our estimate to close to 3,000 jobs, which is 42% increase over what we have on the ground now. Half Moon Bay, in this case, has the greatest capacity for non-residential development, with about 1.5 million square feet of additional development capacity. But the greatest percentage growth would be in the Midcoast sub-area and in the Princeton sub-area, which would both see about 90% increase. There's another, of course, as you are all very familiar with, there's another dimension to growth in the Midcoast area, which is the capacity of infrastructure systems. And we specifically don't use that as our threshold for analysis for this project because of the way the LCP policy is. We need to be able to understand what the actual build-out would be, aside, taking away this constraint, which we know is a real constraint. What is the overall sort of conservative build-out estimate? But we do want to also reflect that there are currently constraints with regard to water capacity on the Midcoast. So briefly, the Coastal Act requires that water be reserved for priority land uses, and the priorities of the Coastal Act are coastal recreation and coastal dependent uses. So the Midcoast LCP reserves 61,000 to 77,000 gallons per day in the Montera Water and Sewer District, and a much larger 490 to 532,000 gallons per day for the CCWD, which has a much larger service area or service population in the Midcoast area. Half Moon Bay CCWD is the water service provider, and the Half Moon Bay LCP reserves 1 million gallons per day at build-out. The latest information that we have available on the relationship between estimated water demand and supply in the Montera Water and Sanitary District, the current Public Works Plan estimates that there is about 128,000 gallons per day available for priority uses, only 47,000 gallons per day available for non-priority uses, which wouldn't actually allow that service area to develop probably to the build-out extent. In the CCWD service district, we don't have I don't have quite the same apples to apples comparison here, but the current water usage of 2,265 acre-feet per year is projected to rise to 3,149 by 2035, but they don't currently have the ability to get that much water from SFPUC. There's also a constraint potentially with water connections. I hope I'm getting this right, and I may require some corrections. It's complicated material. When new development is to install new water connections, it needs to show consistency with the governing public works plan in the Montero district. For CCWD, there's actually very small number of unsold water connections and 0 unsold non-priority connections. And there is more demand for non-priority use connections, which are things like just regular residential and commercial development. So, you know, these are real constraints that we're dealing with. I'll go back to Bill to bring sort of these build-out numbers into the traffic perspective.
So this project is not designed to find out how much development do you want. It's to figure out how much development could be supported with the transportation system that exists now, or with improvements that could be made with available funding, and that evaluated using standards that have been established for quality of transportation. So that's what we set out to do. We have used the San Mateo County, or CCAG, VTA travel model. It's a model that includes all of the region with a lot more detail in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. We did forecast with this build-out land use within the Midcoast and Half Moon Bay area, and the forecast that had been produced by the regional agencies for the rest of the Bay Area in there for 2040. So it is a regional model. It does reflect regional flows and the relationship of Midcoast to other parts of the county and other parts of the region. You may remember there was, Peter said there was, build out would be a 51% increase in residential development, 42% in non-residential. When we looked at peak hour flows on the roadways, it was generally a little bit less than that, but not a whole lot. It ranged on Highway 1 from 10% to 50% growth in peak period travel, but most of it was between 35 and 40%. And on Highway 92, it ranged from 15 to 35, but again, closer you get to Half Moon Bay, the increase was closer to the 35%. So that gives you a general sense of how overall traffic during the peak period is likely to increase from build-out. So with that, we looked at locations for which there would be some governing standard, and there are standards only for traffic level of service. Some relate to the segments between intersections, and some relate specifically to intersections, and there are differences between signalized intersections and unsignalized intersections. There are some that are from the standards from the county. Some, Half Moon Bay has its own standards, but what we found were the controlling standards for evaluating these are the ones that are in the local coastal program. They were in fact the strictest, and so that's what we evaluated whether there would be a problem. So in these maps by sub-area, a red dot indicates that it would exceed the standard established by the LCP, and that's generally about a level of service D, if you're used to talking in level of service terms, is the standard. So E or worse would be a violation of that. They do have a separate standard for peak recreational travel, but we haven't really evaluated the peak recreational time. We're still working on methods to forecast that. So this is really based on the peak commute period. So this is Montero. This map is now. It was the data we collected this summer. Each one of these will be a pair. I'll show now and I'll show 2040. In Montero, there was one. If there's not a heavy circle around it, it's a two-way stop control or stop control. There's not a traffic control device there, a signal, which becomes a problem as volume increases on one. it gets harder to have gaps that people can use to turn left, and left turns are the real problems with stop-controlled intersections. So there's already one at Ocean View in the existing case, and a second one at Second Street violated in 2040 with the future forecast. Well, I'm going to go through these quickly because the bottom line is it gets worse in all of the sub-areas. 22 stop-controlled intersections move into violation with the 2040 forecast. And again, that's primarily because of the volume on Highway 1, not because of the volume being added on the cross streets. The problem is not having gaps. So to deal with that, you either have to signalize, you have to prohibit left turns, or you put something, a roundabout or some mechanism for being able to allow more continuous flow and not have cars wait for a gap. So that's the kind of solution, but that's the bottom line, is there are a lot of them that go from being within the standard out. So Moss Beach, I think there were 4 stop-controlled intersections, actually 5, there's one right at the bottom, and a 6th one gets added in the future. And there are problems on Highway 1. There's another level of service for just the flow on the highway, and that's related to its width and the volume of it, and almost all of these have problems in the future year. So El Granada, there are 2 signalized intersections and 4 stop control, and no problems now. In the future, there's one at Coral Reef that exceeds the standard. In Miramar, there are 4 that are stop control, and they're all exceeding the standard now, and that gets worse, and the segments get worse.
What does stop control mean, just a stop sign?
Just a stop sign. So there's no stopping on one, only on the side street.
So again, the signalized intersections are the ones that have the dark circle around them, correct?
And so for many of them, if it is signalized, like here on so it takes care of that problem with a signal. But there are 5 in this North Half Moon Bay that are stop control that are problems now. And actually, the volume on that signalized intersection is one that I think there are 4 that move. Signalized intersections that move into a exceedance situation, and that's one of them that does that. In downtown Half Moon Bay, there are 2 signals that are already problems, Main Street and 92 and Main Street on the north side of 1, as well as 3 stop control. There's some improvements planned that will produce some improvements in that area shown in the blue. But there are other places like at Kelly where it would exceed the capacity of the signalized intersection in the future year. And some other stop controls. South of downtown, there's really 2 stop control that exceed the standard now, and I think that stays the same, but with again, the Kelly, it was shown in a previous one, is a signalized intersection that would exceed the standard. And south of Half Moon Bay, the level of service on the roadway itself would violate the standard, but not at the intersections. And then on 92, there are 2 stop-controlled intersections that exceed the standard now, and the condition worsens there and over all of the segments, as well as the signal up near 280.
What are the intersections on 92?
Hillercetus and Skyline itself.
Hawks Mountain and Skyline. So the 2040 element here is with the full build-out which you projected. So clearly, full build-out causes a serious issue.
And so that's the starting point now, that we say, okay, yes, there's a problem. You can't just build all this and have no problems with no transportation investment. So our next step now is to say, well, what can be done? What kind of transportation investment could address these issues? Now, there aren't standards for how long a pedestrian has to wait to cross a road, or conditions for that. But we will be looking at that anyway. That will be part of what will be taken into account, because, again, part of the charge is to maintain access to the coastal area. So crossing of Highway 1 is important, making the connections to provide that access. So we're building that in, but again, the judgment against the standards tends to fall back on these traffic issues for which a formal standard has been stated. So we're.
So I did want to come back to one thing on that. So Dan said Ox Mountain. Ox Mountain's a private road. Are you considering private roads as access control points that need to be addressed?
I'd have to look at the report to see if that was
I think he's
one
right,
we
because
did.
Pillar C, this is further up.
I think that third red dot, isn't that the level of service on the road itself?
Oh, that's,
No,
No,
it's not. It's an intersection.
the color on the line is the segment level service. So wherever there was a dot, and I'd have to look to see what those.
You had a
locations-
road off of 92 called Muddy Road, maybe that's the Ox Mountain. There were some names there that weren't familiar to me, but I assumed it was those intersections for the.
Yeah, and we can check those. So, with this analysis, we know we have to evaluate alternatives, so it starts to set that up. We will be looking at options that could improve pedestrian and bicycle movements, included improved pedestrian crosswalks, illuminated crosswalks, countdown indicators, increasing the width of sidewalks, connecting existing sidewalks and removing obstacles. That's, it came up over and over again, the gaps and the need to do that. And then certainly making sure the coastal trail is, the gaps are identified and projects identified to extend and connect the trail, looking at ADA compliance and, again, lighting.
Does that mean the coastal
On that-
trail, or what we refer to
I
as the
think what-
parallel trail?
That coastal trail in that sentence, you mean the parallel trail. The coastal
Yeah.
trail is west of the highway, whereas the parallel trail follows the highway.
Yes, I
So
think
that's-
that's what was meant.
To
by that.
people here, that would be the parallel trail.
Yeah. And then we threw in some of the diagrams from the work that was done in the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study, and everything that was in there will be included in the consideration, and the input that was received through that significant public input effort will be included. So things like the Gray Whale Cove parking lot with striped highway crossings and left turn bays, acceleration lanes. Those kinds of concepts will be looked at. The Montera Beach and trail access, again, highway crossings and beach parking. In Montera, raised medians to limit turns across the road, restrict and consolidate left turns. Again, that's, the left turns are the big issue that have to be dealt with from the side roads. Designated pedestrian crossings, and we'll be looking at roundabouts. That was examined in the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study, and we will include consideration of roundabouts where they would appear to be a logical option.
Since roundabouts were considered in Half Moon Bay, will they not be considered there?
I'm sorry?
In your Half Moon Bay transportation plans, there's no reference to things like roundabouts there, so you don't be looking at roundabouts in Midcoast?
No, I think we would, and there were none formally proposed in Half Moon Bay, but left as options for intersections that would require changes in traffic control with increase in volume. They were open to that, but the way that the circulation element was developed at the time, they had, they only moved forward specific projects that had gone through local postal program or postal commission approval, and there were no roundabouts that had gotten to that point. So
Did you find any interest in the public there when you did the studies?
yes, there was some. And it's, you know, and they're definitely growing in acceptance in the state, and you're seeing more and more of them, and in the right kind of situation can be a very efficient way of handling that traffic from side roads. And the improvements that had been identified in the circulation element will be taken into consideration. A lot of those were in the Grand Boulevard, Terrace Avenue area, but other concepts were identified for further explanation, which will be taken into account. So we're just now starting out. We've been developing an inventory of the improvement ideas that have come out of other studies, and to make sure that everything that has been identified in the past as an option is being considered. We will begin seeking public input in a workshop on the 10th of November. It will be at the Half Moon Bay Brewing Company, 6:30 to 8:30. We've actually already been getting input from the public. We've been maintaining a website, Connect the Coast Side website, and there's an option in there to give your ideas for improvements, and we received a very large number of ideas, so that will be taken into account. We're going to the Planning Commission on Wednesday, December 17th, with the report that has been drafted, that has been distributed for review by the TAC. Based on comments we got from the TAC, we're making some revisions to that report before submitting it to the commission. We'll be asking them to accept that, and then that will really initiate the development of alternatives. And then with some specific alternatives, we will do an evaluation of the alternatives. We'll do an environmental review of those alternatives and put forward a recommendation for a transportation program, a cost estimate for that, and a program for funding that, which could include the development of a development impact fee to support transportation improvement.
You have a slide that shows who was on the TAC?
Yeah, we have over 27 members.
Can you put it up?
Yeah, we can list it.
Great.
Isn't it on our website, Lisa?
No, I haven't seen the
I
list.
thought it was
Haven't
part-
seen the
No,
list.
it's not.
We can-
Oh, I thought it was part of the,
we can post it.
okay.
If it's not already.
Yeah, what's that?
If it's not already, we can post it.
Yeah, we can post that on the Connect the Coast Side website. Would be the easiest way to do it.
You say it's posted there?
I'm not sure, I don't think it's on that site
It's in the
yet.
study that's posted, is it not? Within the study that is posted? If
No,
not the
there's
study?
no listing of the
Oh, I
TAC.
thought there was. Where did I see it?
We have, you may be on the, you're on the
email
Connect the
distribution
Coast
you saw.
Side TAC
The MCC has a representative.
site.
Right,
Including.
that's me.
And the list was posted on that. So,
Oh, okay, that's where I saw it,
yeah,
okay.
If you're a member of the TAC,
You saw it.
you have the list, and so we can put
So
that
you're the one
same
that's
list
seen it.
on the public.
Can you show it here tonight?
Len, what are you worried about?
I may not be able to, I think that's on our server, not on my hard drive, and I don't think I have web connection here.
Well, while you're doing that, I'm assuming from everything I've read, and I didn't go through every page of the full document, and from what you've said tonight, that development would be limited because you can't improve transportation enough to to leave things in satisfactory condition. Is that a fair guess, or are you not willing to, have you not reached the point where you can say that yet?
I'd have to say that we haven't reached the point yet where we could say that. Could well be a possibility. Like I said, when it comes to the standards, most of the issue is around stop controlled intersections. There are ways that can be handled. Like I said, limiting many of them to right turn only with designs that have turnaround opportunities. So there are ways that it can be handled, whether that's, acceptable transportation and a desirable program, we'll have to see.
So all of this, you said earlier, you did not factor in the visitor. This was just commuting. Communities commuting in and out, right? Not the added visitor element, correct?
Well, we've taken some account of that in the peak period commute volumes. And we have taken counts of what we consider to be a peak recreational period, but we're looking at forecast of recreational use. The National Park Service is doing some of that. We'll work with them and state parks to look at how much recreational use may be growing, separate from the actual residential growth, and then put those two together. So far, we've really taken the counts that we've taken on the weekends and factored them up on the basis of how much peak period travel is in that. That's probably not a real accurate way to do that, but that's as far as we've gone so far, and we haven't really evaluated against the peak period recreational time. But again, the standard is less stringent than for peak period.
They've got the existing conditions for recreational. What the issue is how to predict what the recreational traffic will be in 30 years.
So that's very important to consider. Yes.
Yes, and we're continuing to work on that.
Okay.
Other questions from Chris?
Thank you all very much for the hard work on this. I'm really glad to see, representatives from each of these three groups because, Peter, with Plan Princeton and everything, and James, it's good to see that. I know DKS is heavily involved as well, so I'm happy to see this kind of integration of the planning process. I hate to dial down in the details, but I did look through the draft document, and it's heavy on methodology, so therefore those are the things that I was taking note of. A couple of things that leapt out at me was on page 6 when it's talking about intersection LOS, the weekend midday recreational period from which the numbers were drawn was listed as 10 a.m. to noon. And the weekend midday recreational peak period from which the data was collected was 10 a.m. to noon. And that seems logical, but in my years out on the coast, there's almost, the morning traffic is actually pretty light and it builds all the way up into the afternoon. And I think if you went and looked at your parking data, which on page 29 and page 32, kind of well, not exposes, but shows that the peak period is really later in the afternoon. The parking on page 29, highest occupancy rate in Half Moon Bay was observed during the afternoon hours. Above page 32, above 100% parking capacity during the afternoon hours. The peak period, especially on weekends, is like 2 to 5, 2 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you can see the cars backed up all the way past El Granada. The morning, the traffic is flowing in the morning. I can see it down my street. It's flowing in the morning, it's the afternoon. So I don't know what that does to the numbers, but again, that, when we're talking about all this methodology, that's something that jumped out at me. Another point that I wanted to say, thank you for the discussion of the public transit, the Sam Trans. I like the wording you used in there about the dignity of the riders and their, attempts to not have to wait 2 hours for a bus that comes every once in a while, and the attention on the fact that we need, some addressing of the public transportation situation, especially since it seems over the last few years, Sam Trans has been reducing their service. But I did not see any discussion of what I think is a major factor, especially at morning peak hour traffic situation, which is the schools and the lack of a school busing program here on the coast. And I would like to see some discussion of that, because I would like to see the county do something with the school district here. The school district right now is floating some pilot program for paid bus service where their kids and their families have to pay for bus service. Everybody knows my story. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. The only way to get to school, the only way, was on the bus, and that bus service was free. And I think that the county needs to work with the school district to deal with some kind of busing program where the county helps to provide grants or money or something. But the amount of traffic generated by morning drop-offs of students, especially since the only high school and the only middle school are in Half Moon Bay. The middle school is south of 92. So you gotta get through all of that to get your kid down there if that's what you're doing. The Spanish immersion program is only at Hatch, south of 92. So if there was some way to calculate, I think you need to look at the amount of traffic generated by parents and students driving to school as opposed to being able to take a bus. So that's something I would have liked to have seen in there. And then the last question I have for, maybe it's Peter, maybe it's James, is page 46 and elsewhere, and you mentioned it in your slide. Land with current or planned development projects was considered separately. So I get that, but what I didn't understand was, so it's considered separately and then poured into this mix, or considered separately? How considered? It seems like I don't know. That just considered separately, but we have all this methodology of these other categories, but land with current or planned considered separately. Like it's a, I don't know. Help me, computer guy. It's a black box to me. What does that mean? How was it considered, and how was it poured into the other data? So that's it. You don't necessarily need to answer that now, but as a person that may, other people that might read this document, how was it considered separately? That's not enough of a statement to satisfy me in a document so rich with methodology and footnote. So thank you very much for listening to that.
I just want to tag on to you, Chris, regarding schools, because number one, I have an opportunity to have a child at College of San Mateo, and you can get to the school very easily, but when you come back, you have to ride, it takes like an extra 45 minutes to get to El Granada. You have to ride all the way through this loop of Half Moon Bay, and then to El Granada. Well, it's like, how long does it take to do it in your car? I'm just saying it's hard to convince children to get, oh yes, you want to take the bus, even though it'll take another extra hour out of your day for a 30-minute ride. I was curious to know, how many people actually attend the College of San Mateo from here, because that would take a lot of people off the road. I think there's a good amount that do, but I don't know the data on that. And the other piece, this is just detail that you might be interested in. Kids in high school, they don't want to be dropped off. They want to be driven by their parents because they don't want to have to walk up the hill. Hair gets mussy from the wind if you're a girl. Seriously, these are like family arguments, and so then your child is trying to find someone who's driving if you're not going to, so they don't have to take the bus and all of this sweat of walking up the hill. So heck, so the bus drives up and turns around and drops people off. If this gets cars off the road, let the bus drive up the hill and drop them off. These are just small things that could really have an impact at any rate on that morning commute, which is horrendous.
Dan?
So in a broad sense, these build-out numbers that you estimated, if they were maxed out, there would be greater local congestion which would plug and limit access from visitors. So my question is there a way to evaluate the losses to the business community of plugging up a local congestion, which would be cutting access to visitors to the area, and its effect on local business as a result?
It's difficult to quantify that. There are ways to quantify the loss in business of congestion. That it's not been a part of our scope to do that. And it's something that I think we would have to talk with county about whether something could be done along those lines. We can provide a lot of text about what kinds of effect it does have on the economy, but to actually quantify it is fairly difficult, but another analytical step that we hadn't scoped for.
But keep in mind that this study is required by the Coastal Commission, and their concern is how it impacts coastal visitors, not so much how it impacts coastal businesses. It's whether people can get over to the coast and enjoy what they came for. That's what the Coastal Commission wants to make sure we don't have so much residential development that it impacts the visitors.
And one indicator that we do take a look at the non-residential build-out, which could include commercial and other similar uses. So there may be some influence from whatever, the evaluation that we have based on analysis, but in terms of a specific business-specific impact, that may require an additional study.
Dave, you have anything?
No, nothing else.
Laura?
I'm not sure if my comments are even appropriate for here, but I had another school issue. So when you, at the end of this whole thing, and you're making recommendations, are you making recommendations about specific actions that can be taken, or I'm not clear on what your true end result goal is in mind here?
Right. Our recommendation at the end of all this will be for a transportation investment program, specific projects that could mitigate the effects of a certain level of development. And with that, we will be identifying what level of development we think that could be supported. So it may not be the full build-out, it may be something short of that, but that as a level of development for which a reasonable transportation investment could be put forward to fund it. We will also be looking at what could be generated by a development impact fee, given the amount of new development that would be allowed under whatever that level is. We could look at what might reasonably be expected from that and how much it could contribute toward funding those improvements. There are restrictions on that. There has to be a direct connection between what is being charged for that development impact fee and the effect of new development on level service or on standards or on the need for transportation. So if something is already level service F, the development doesn't happen to make it any worse, the fee program can't really be used to fix that problem because that's already an existing problem from existing development, and the new development isn't.
Wait, the F just means it's really bad. It doesn't mean it can't get worse. So
Right.
don't say that.
Well, that's what I said. I said, yeah, if it exceeds the standard and it doesn't get any worse,
Okay.
with the forecast, then you haven't established a connection or a nexus between the development and the fee that they pay and the improvement for that. There are other restrictions, like you generally cannot pay for operational improvements or maintenance out of a development. In fact, it has to be for facilities, capital expenditures. So fortunately, things like school bus service or transit services is difficult. You could pay for equipment or stop improvements, but not labor and bus service hours. So we will be generating an estimate of what the fee program would be, what would likely to be the fee level for the transportation improvements, and what qualifies for, again, consideration by the Planning Commission and ultimately the Board of Supervisors as to what they want to move forward with. But it will include a development level, a set of transportation improvements, and a financial package.
Isn't this plan supposed to also evaluate the feasibility of a mandatory substandard lot merger program?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
some stuff on the other side of how to not reach
How to
build out,
Right, there's a land side component that we would be looking at in terms of managing.
the balance that
Yeah,
you
right.
spoke of.
As well as a development review process, a monitoring process for this program to be monitored over time, so that, again, that balance between development and transportation services is always there.
Now, the website where you've been getting comments from the public, are those focused on what type of road improvements they'd like to see, or do they talk about, are you getting comments, or is there a way to comment on the preferred balance? Like, let's not develop so much that we have to have this kind of road, or whatever it is.
We've gotten both. I think the more are on transportation improvements they like to see, but we're getting both kinds of comments, and I haven't gone through all of them. Like that, we just tabulated them to be able to start using in our work and put some of that forward in the workshop that's coming up. But we have gotten comments of both
But
kinds.
what other methods besides the online survey would be useful for people to comment? Like if they wanted to submit a letter, or, I mean, where would they say, would they send that to you?
Yeah, I would be the contact person of the project manager. My information is on the website, the project website, in the back, or if you go across the tab, there should be contact information. Letters, emails, phone calls, when I,
So that will
Yeah,
all
we'll
be
take
kept
any
track
of them.
of, and like, as
Right.
we saw here tonight, there, other than the short notes that were submitted for the TAC from MCC, other members clearly have had other comments. Do you need those written and sent to you summarized, or would that be helpful, or
the
what?
written portion is easy to consolidate, so if you do write it out, I mean, I can take, phone calls are fine. I mean, we can discuss them back and forth, and we can notate them, and also I could tabulate them in an email as a follow-up. But yeah, or a formal letter if you prefer.
All right,
And again,
And that goes to the public as well.
You're gonna open it up to public
Yes.
questions soon, right?
yes.
the website, Connect the Coast Side, is the name of the website. If you just Google that, you'll go to the website, and that gives ways that you can participate. You can get on an email blast, you can submit comments directly there of any nature, so it's a good place to start if anybody wants to comment from the public.
All right, I will open public comment. I have a,
One quick, do you, as far as transportation investments, do you accept that by having at the key pedestrian crossing areas where they would likely cross the most, and they do today, at grade, if they were relocated below grade, would that be a positive for not only the drivers going up and down, but also the ones turning? You eliminate the pedestrians from being hit, but also from slowing down the greater traffic. Do you accept that that's a value?
Yeah, I think, and that's been recommended in just about every forum that I've seen for input on these projects, so I think we will look at some grade-separated crossings.
Thank you.
all right, I have a speaker slip here from Leonard.
remember who said it first, but you know, when you're waist deep in a hole, the first thing you're supposed to do is stop digging. And basically everybody except the decision makers at the county knows that there's only one cause of the problems here, and that's there's too many people living here. And so the fix is to limit how many more people are going to be added to an already bad situation. And some years ago, I suggested that the way to do that without running into takings problems is you reduce the maximum house size that's allowed on any given amount of land. So that, and I'm talking about a 1/3 to 1/2 reduction, which means that if you want to build your 5,000 square foot house, you're going to have to go out and get 20,000 square feet of land instead of 10. And that's an easy fix. It will survive challenges through the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's ruled on this multiple times that a down zoning is not a takings. And so that can be done. You know, I'm glad to hear, I'm glad that I didn't hear any talk about widening the highway, because that will just totally destroy the character of the coast side. It has to stay 2 lanes. The Coastal Act requires it to be 2 lanes north of Half Moon Bay. And you talked about water as if that's a limiting factor. It's not a limiting factor because the county allows willy-nilly people to build houses on private wells, and that has to stop because that's a pending disaster. And you know, as far as many of us are concerned, we've already exceeded the carrying capacity of the coast side. We're way, way beyond the natural water that is available here. We're clearly beyond the road capacity. But a really big problem is 2 signals went in improperly without adding storage lanes, Coronado and Frenchman's Creek. I'm not going to try and say the name of that street. Only people that live there can actually pronounce that. But there needs to be an absolute moratorium, a total ban on new signals on Highway 1 until both of those intersections are repaired by adding storage lanes. And if there's not going to be storage lanes added at those 2 improperly done signals, then there can't be any more signals. And by the way, Kelly is a problem because it's not demand driven. You need different capacities in the various directions at different times a day, but it just rotates on this fixed timer, and so sometimes you're sitting there and there's nobody moving because some idiot installed it without demand-driven capability. So you fix Kelly by putting in the demand-driven stuff. And the proof, by the way, that the school is a big problem is traffic is so much lighter during school vacations and school holidays. Everybody knows that. I don't know how to find the reference. Years ago I was involved in this same topic in West LA, but there is a state law somewhere that says that the permitting agency is not allowed to permit new development that will cause the level of traffic, level of service to go from E to F. Now, there's a defect in the state law, which Dave alluded to. But, you know, the first thing is let's stop digging the hole deeper. And I do support the roundabouts. I know how to turn the steering wheel.
Lynn?
Question in terms of the process and the tools you use and have access to, as opposed to the things you don't. So I would imagine, for example, as people have asked you about buses or tunneling under the highway or things like that, that you're not involved in any action process that relates to those things. So in terms of, let's say, roundabouts, and should those be used, will you bring new tools like a modeling tool that would tell us whether they're providing improved throughput for number of cars or things of that type?
Yes, yeah, that's pretty standard now. That's.
And I know, and I've attended, I think 2 or 3 of your briefings. I know here the questions come from the slant of, could you please constrain it? Could you please keep it down? I think you've responded positively there. I've attended other meetings where it's, well, can you get more capacity coming over the hill, more of this? And you responded positively, we'll look at that. I assume in both cases you aren't running the action levers, but you sort of, you know, respond positively what people are interested in, which is appropriate at some level. The question that's not known as you bring this together is what kind of process does it lead to in terms of decisions. And if you can, provide a framework, especially, since you've seen no real reference that I could detect on roundabouts and alternative intersection treatments in Half Moon Bay, and that was front and center of the studies we did here. There's clearly a lot of interest, but something that provides, some focus on it, some tool to understand what is it really going to do in terms of improvements. I mean, certainly since the studies were done here that started 6 years ago, as you noted, the state has done a lot more to accept and take on roundabout projects in major coastal communities. So I think there's certainly a place for it. So giving people something to look at in a way would be important. I asked with regard to the composition of the steering committee, because I noticed your team has basically nobody on it who was involved with the major transportation studies here, as best I could detect.
Well,
And in terms of the steering committee, I know we do have one member on it, but there seems very limited representation from the Midcoast, which is sort of at the heart of what brought this project forward.
Well, we decided early on that there would be a technical advisory committee, and as part of that technical advisory committee, we had over 24 agencies representing government, and then also nonprofit, and also representative bodies. And that was something that, in the interest of the scope of this plan, it has a technical methodology, and so we thought that having that committee would be the most appropriate at that time. So that's why there's a single technical advisory committee comprised of some agencies that were involved in the Highway 1 safety and mobility study, including law enforcement, first responders, as well as Samtrans and Caltrans as well. So, and then also quite a few others. But
My statement was, if you were to go back through the LCP process, going back 6 or 10 years, you'd find an enormous amount of effort put in by the community, by individuals who evaluated technical propositions in great detail. And basically the net of that is you put one person from the MCC on your steering committee. And if you counted the number of people, the number of hours they spent, and their familiarity with the issues, I think it's really out of balance. So I think your judgment to say one MCC person, well, that person may be a fine person, you've really shortchanged the community on that. And I think that's really at the heart of the studies. This is about the Midcoast plan. That was where the impetus to put the effort together came from.
we also hope to supplement the technical advice that we receive with the public workshops, and there will be public workshops.
I understand that. My question really is about the technical advisory committee. That's why I asked you to post who's on it,
Sure.
and where do those people come from. I mean, nothing against their efforts, but I think it's out of balance. I don't think you have anybody, let's say, from the Granada Community Service District on it. Just for
We do, actually.
What's that?
General manager.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify, so the Midcoast is well represented on the TAC. I mean, one, keep in mind, the TAC is a technical body, and when it comes to soliciting community feedback and ensuring that the community's desires are incorporated into the study, we're having the workshops. Now, the Midcoast is represented by the Midcoast Community Council, which is an elected body that represents the entire Midcoast. It's also has a member of the Granada Sanitary District, SAM, MWSD, County Parks has a seat on the TAC, which was involved with the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study. Supervisor Horsley is on the TAC. I represent him on the TAC, but so the Midcoast is definitely represented. And like I said, I mean, the technical, keep in mind that the technical advisory committee is to solicit technical feedback. And then when it comes to community desires and what the community would like to see, that's why we have this robust community engagement. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we're soliciting from everyone in the community. And
No, I appreciate what you're saying. What my point is that when Supervisor Horsley first came on, when we came involved to MCC participation, he was happy to put on 2 or 3 people, as long as it wasn't a quorum. And that now it's shrunk to 1 over a course of 4 or 5 years. So his policy of appointments like that has really changed over time.
Well, I would disagree. Like Princeton has 1 rep from the Midcoast Community Council.
That's my point.
But you're talking about the Devil's Slide Task Force. Those are 2 very different things.
I could list all the things I'm talking about.
I
Anyway.
would disagree that the policy has changed.
Okay, and then, you know, finally, I don't think your team has any people who were really involved in the two transportation studies. Your
And
execution
Nelson
team.
Nygaard, the firm, was involved.
They were, but the
but
one
the
engineer who was
individuals
really
that-
involved is now an engineer in Hawaii, so
Yeah.
I don't see anybody who was really involved from that firm. So those are the concerns.
And we are, as I said, we're reviewing all the documents that we can get from that, and if there are any more that are not in the formal documentation of it, anything else, we welcome that input. That's the easiest way for us to get is if there was documented results or findings that didn't get into those reports, because we're certainly going through those reports in detail.
Can you still accept comments through the website?
Yeah, sure. That'll continue for as long as the project's running.
Bill?
Bill Keogh, Morse Beach. This is anecdotal evidence, and I don't know if it was included in part of your study, but since the tunnel opened, I now notice on weekend afternoons trying to go north on Highway 1 to avoid the clog on 92 has become so bad. Now, it might have to do with the bridge rebuilding in Lindemar, but I was shocked the past 2 weekends that traffic was backed up all the way from Lindemar down to the airport in Moss Beach.
In which direction?
Going north. That has happened before going south, and so we always knew that, at least the people that live in the upper part of the unincorporated Midcoast, that we could sneak out and go through Pacifica.
It's the,
It was
it's the
actually
San
backed-
Pedro Creek Bridge from.
Yeah,
No,
well,
no, it wasn't. I came south on Saturday at 6 o'clock, and it was backed up all the way to the freeway section of Highway 1 in Pacifica.
Southbound?
Yeah, northbound.
That's fine.
Everyone's complaining on next door.
Yeah,
There's a
no, I
lot of
know,
stuff
and,
about
and,
that,
and,
yeah.
So
and
that was
I,
not the bridge repair.
but I'm saying, so anecdotally, you know, my first guess was it's the San Pedro Bridge, Lindemar Bridge, remodeling, but there's also, even before they started that, there has been a whole lot more traffic now coming down through the tunnel. So obviously, when they go home, they're probably gonna go back through the tunnel, they're coming down from the north. So it's just really increased it now in yet a new direction. The issue then becomes, and when I was out there, I was actually coming up from down south. I was in the north end of Half Moon Bay, down by Miramar, so I didn't have far to go. But I saw an ambulance trying to go north, and that was blocked up. And so I begin to think, I know you mentioned it, I didn't hear you mention specifically Coastside Fire as one of the first responders, but things like roundabouts and all that, the effect it now will have on the amount of time for them to actually get to an incident. Is all that stuff, I mean, are you talking to Chief Cole down there
Yeah,
and
we
his
have,
representative and making sure that,
CHP,
Sure.
and the sheriff's office and county fire are all involved on the technical advisory committee and have a specific
Okay.
interest in
And-
the operations on the site.
I'm not sure when you say county fire, who you mean?
We have, Fire Marshal Mark Mondragon.
Okay, yeah, I mean, personally, I feel a bit comfortable if I knew it was somebody from Coastside Fire, because they're responsible for the ambulance and the fire trucks and the emergency medical and all that kind of stuff out here. So they're the ones that actually track the time. I'm sure it bubbles up to the county guy somehow through CAL FIRE. I don't know all that, the command and control structure of that organization, but they would certainly be able to tell you on any given incident on the weekends or during the week, how long it takes somebody to get from Station 40 or Station 44 to the incident and so on.
Right, yeah, and that's a good point.
And I thought before, I mean, you had, let's say, somebody like Chief Cosgrave, one of the chiefs that, you know, they have to do monthly reports to the fire board, so they would certainly have that.
Yeah, when we were forming the technical advisory committee, we reached out to the Coastside Fire District
Okay.
and ultimately got kicked up to the fire
Okay, so they
marshal.
pushed it up there, okay.
So, but, you
They
know,
must-
we can follow up on the level of communication and input that they have.
Okay,
Certainly.
thank you.
Okay, close the public comment. Oh, Gail.
You mentioned that you had someone from Samtrans on this technical
Samtrans is
advisory.
on the technical.
Who from Samtrans is on it?
We have the transit planning manager, Barrow Emerson.
Okay, because I think that, I think you also mentioned something like a very limited service. And you probably know too, with the exception of certain times of day, like some kids who take it to get to some schools, it's not used very often. And I was wondering if you have any public outreach or getting impact from people who would like to use it or can use it, but don't know how to get the scheduling, don't know anything about it.
Yeah, this is something we can look into further. One thing I can say is we actually had a meeting scheduled today that needed to be rescheduled for the very near future between the Camarillo Unified School, Cabrillo Unified School District and Samtrans and the county to discuss that and it goes back to some of the comments earlier about school access related to transit and related to the overall picture of congestion and access.
Because it's interesting to find out too how they decide where they're gonna have certain stops and things like that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, at the, as we strategize, we would look for Samtrans to have extensive input onto how they may be able to either enhance their operations or somehow reconfigure it.
So I certainly think they could, but I think they need to find out a little bit more about what people's needs are.
Sure.
And I don't know how they're doing that right now or how they would be doing that in the future.
They had public outreach sessions both here at the MCC and in Half Moon Bay. Their problem was financial.
That's money. They also did all sorts of studies as to who was in it, but it's chicken or the egg. If you don't use it, you don't get it, vice versa.
Well, that's what I mean, yeah.
I would encourage, to the extent possible, if you can make it out to the workshops to submit comments, either.
Oh, I will get my name on the list. I decided this past weekend, when I was doing some volunteer work in Half Moon Bay at the Pumpkin Festival, that rather than drive, I take the bus. Very interesting experience.
Okay, now close the public comment. Do any council members have any parting remarks on this subject?
One last on schools, which I didn't get out, and that was every single school on the coast side they need to be coordinating their times as to drop off and pick up, so that, and I would just ask that, Mr. Loudon, if somebody could take a look at the intersection of Coronado and Route 1 between 7 and 7:30 during the week, because you have a stop sign there, you have Feeder Street, 1, 2, 3, 4 converging, is that right? 4 converging roads, and you don't move, and there's backups. And this is the stop sign, which is because it's set in, it's not noted on the your maps. I don't think you're even looking at it. It's a frontage road that converges with.
You did Obispo Road, didn't you? Do that intersection? I thought I saw it there.
It deals with the highway going to Coronado,
Yeah.
but not with the fact that the school is there and school drop-off. It's the same problem as the high school. It is actually pretty amazing to try to go through that intersection at that time of day.
On a daily basis.
Anything else?
Only it's gonna take me about 4 weeks to type up these minutes. I'll do my best.
We'll give you an extension.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what Laura just brought up, it happens a lot, where it's just all these intersections merging, and it's just, I call that local congestion. The greater it's built out, the more we would have that, the more we try to keep that highway flowing, the more that would be increased in the local congestion, which leads into the quality of life to the residents and also the quality of the visit for the visitors. So it's other things to keep in mind.
okay, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for making that.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a
Also
motion. I'll second.
Okay,